The Banquet of the Sages. Or, Instruction of Mercury to one of his disciples. Central Library of the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. Manuscript number 2040, 19th century. First dish. From my earliest youth I sought to penetrate into the order of the laws of nature, subject to the rules that God prescribed for it from the very moment of the creation of the world. And I noticed that it acts in all things with the same simplicity. Occupied in studying and meditating upon these admirable laws, one day, among others, when Aries brought back to our hemisphere the fair days of a pleasant spring, I was approached by a young man whose stature and majesty were above the ordinary. "My friend," said he to me, "for a long time I have observed you. It has seemed to me that you are greatly troubled, and that serious study renders you sad and melancholy in humor. Might one know the subject of your meditations and of your pains?" "Whoever you may be," I answered him, "I fear to confess to you the subject of my pains, which in you would find nothing but contempt and mocking laughter for the subject of my meditations." "No," said he, "I am he whom you seek. I call myself the Unknown and Universal Mercury, who can satisfy you. I am that very Mercury which is found in all the bodies of nature, which gives movement and life to all things. Nothing lives nor breathes but by me. I am the son of Jupiter and Juno, it is I who take all imaginable forms. I am Protheus, who impresses movement upon all things. When I attach myself to a subject, I conform to its nature. I excite it by my sweetness, I prick it without bitterness, I move it without violence, and I awaken it from its drowsiness by a pleasing action. Then there happens the same thing as in the amorous caresses of animals, that is, an emission of seed of the species of that subject. What makes you all go astray is that you do not apply yourselves enough to understanding the most essential axioms of the philosophers. Here is one upon which you pass too lightly, but which, well meditated and studied, suffices to reveal to you all my secrets. Nature contains nature. Nature rejoices in nature. Nature overcomes nature. How can a sound mind fail to comprehend that the first indicates the matter which, though not metallic, must become metallic, that the second most excellently marks the action of the natural fire, by which Mercury breaks its bonds, to manifest itself to the eyes of the philosophers, and that finally the third expresses how this divine work reaches the term of its perfection without any other aid than that of nature itself, through the industry of nature and of the artist. It is therefore from the amorous kiss made in putrefaction, and by its means from the dry and the moist, from the cold and the hot, that the child of the philosophers is born, whom they have named after me. And this takes place thus: the dry and the hot, which were enclosed within the matter, and which are the depositories of the light and the fire, by the sweetness of the agent, push their rays from the center to the circumference, and quit their deep retreat, where they lay as if benumbed beneath the mass of the moist and the cold which held the exterior. They come to caress them and unite with them through the action of the mediating agent. And as the cold and the moist have darkness and obscurity for their domain, they consent with the dry and the hot that darkness and obscurity flee into the depths of the waters, and that, by an entire separation that is made, they be relegated with all impurity among the scoriae which served as a vile and coarse envelope to a substance composed of elements so pure. And that light and splendor be introduced to illuminate this new world, both without and within, and cause life to reign where before death held its empire, in the horror of impure darkness that oppressed the fire in the dry and the hot, closely bound and reduced as if to a point in the midst of the center. And finally, that the hot and the dry, by a distillation of their virtue, carry their empire to the circumference and reign everywhere, without however destroying the cold and the moist, which shall suffer only, by means of this philosophical reconciliation, to be converted into a hot and dry nature. And this is effected, as I have said, by means of another putrefaction, by the mediation of the agent through which contraries reconcile themselves, as in a middle that partakes of the nature of the whole. But this reconciliation can be made neither in vinegar, nor by strong waters, nor by saline and corrosive menstrua, nor by any elementary water foreign to the metallic species. The philosophers, to explain the sweetness of this agent, have compared its operation to the copulation of animals, because when our Mercury is born, it is a substance that takes its origin from two, and from their union results as it were a third, made of the union of the two seeds. In this sense, Morion said to King Khalid that the work is within him, and that he himself is its mine. Second dish. What is the child of the philosophers? The fault of all students, continued Mercury, is not to know either the child of the philosophers or his marvelous birth. This is their great stumbling block. And you who listen to me, recall your recent works, where, by a certain operation which I had inspired in you, you proceeded in such a manner, so conformable to nature, though upon a subject not the true one, that this noble child, or something resembling him, presented himself 7 times before your eyes, always more beautiful and more radiant, finer than pearls, clearer than silver, whiter than curdled milk, all sprinkled with stars and rays marked with his celestial origin. Yet you knew not the peace nor the importance of this substance so delicate and so fair, which you saw with your eyes and touched with your hands. You perceived that it was something good, but your understanding, still clouded, suggested not to you to gather apart this mercurial substance which was born as if of its own accord, and without your having seen or foreseen its birth. Had you gathered it and separated it from its impure scoriae, upon which it had sublimed itself, and had you afterwards known how to cook it in its own blood, you would have had an abridgment of the solar and lunar tree. But you knew not how to operate with this fair Mercury, you dreamed of what you should do with it, you took time to deliberate, believing it could not escape you, and that an 8th time would show it to you still more beautiful. Which would have happened, had you not increased your fire. But a little more fire than usual made it fly away. The next day you thought to see again this fair child, but he had disappeared. True it is that the thought came to you to take him, to gather him apart, and even to cook him. It was I who inspired you with that thought. But because science was lacking to you, you were not firm. The fear of failing made you fail, and through your irresolution this cherished son flew away. Yet he flew only to the top of the vessel, whence, falling back, he drowned in the Icarian Sea and mingled with an impure sand whence he could not return. Thus he perished unhappily from his very birth in the impure mass of an accursed earth. This is what you all do when you know but half my science. You operate and labor without knowing what you do, without understanding the true principles, and when you see them, they escape you through ignorance. The beauty of that child astonished you. You named that operation which I had given you by the name of eagle, under that form imitating Philalethes in his writing, and in this you were right, for it was a kind of sublimation which imitated nature quite closely. It had indeed a fine effect, but because you knew neither what you were doing nor what should come of it, you could not profit by it, for this discovery you owed not to science but to chance. Let such an example make you wiser in the future. Learn, however, that in this fortuitous work, though upon a subject not the true one, you had found the mean substance of quicksilver, so celebrated by Geber, the great lunar, the shining icy water, and the white lily of the little peasant. Learn then that the time of its birth must be known. Third dish. The error of most artists, continued Mercury, comes from not knowing the precise hour of the birth of this royal son. For although the philosophers agree among themselves upon it, they all designate it differently, in order to cast the students into error. They have even suppressed in their writings that part of the work which produces the Mercury, saying that it is not their work but that of a rustic man, and that the agent they employ to make this precious sublimation is not their Mercury, as Arrow says, cited by Trevisan. They have called this first part of the work the first conjunction and the work of winter, because in this conjunction the Mercury and the sulfur, separated by the preceding operations for their purification, are taken again and reunited by a congelation made by the cold that comes upon them in their sublimation, very different from their philosophical and final congelation which is made by heat. For this reason this work is not acknowledged, nor counted as philosophical. It is one of their artifices. Zacher, one of the most sincere, says that the conjunction of the two sperms which contain the Mercury takes place at the very hour of its birth, and that whoever does not find it at that hour must not expect another in its stead. He who undertakes the work without knowing the determined hour of this birth will reap from his labors only useless sweat. For this conjunction contains the true weights of nature, to which there needs be added only those of art. For, adds this philosopher, if one says that it is made or must be made on the 7th day, another will say the 40th, another the 100th, another at the end of 7 months, another at 9, another at the close of the year. Finally, one finds not two in agreement on this point, although there is but one time, one sole and unique day, yea, one sole and unique moment of the birth of this fruit. Reads a share, 4th part of his little book, page 84, and you will know by heart that the silence of the philosophers on this first work, which they hide from all disciples, is the cause of their error. The hour of this birth, so hidden, is at the end of the perfect putrefaction, which gives the elements easy to separate, to purify, and to reunite after they are pure. This hour must not be missed, for if one neglects it, the mercury rises in vapors, and falling back to the bottom, mingles with the accursed earth whence it can no more be separated. Happy, thrice and 4 times happy, is he who knows this hour and who knows how to profit by it. First Interlude. Mercury, having ended this discourse, said to me, I must show you something rare, whose price and excellence men ignore because of its little appearance. It is nevertheless the rarest wonder of nature. And saying this, he held in his hands a certain earthy mass, which seemed neither hard nor altogether soft, neither quite red nor quite white. It was raw and ill-polished, it resembled earth and was not earth, resembled stone and was not stone, it had a metallic gleam. Considering it, I did not believe I beheld so great a marvel. But this ingenious God breathed upon it, and in an instant it flowed into little drops as clear as the tears of the dawn. He drew forth a small vial into which he received this crystalline liquor. When this mass was almost entirely converted into water, there remained in his hand only an earth, from which he separated with a single breath all the impure, and the earth remained pure and white. He poured the liquor from the vial into a very clean and shining crystal ewer, he cast this little earth therein, and taking his caduceus, breathed upon it. I saw this breath leave his mouth like a small stroke of fire, similar to a flash of lightning. And in that moment, applying his caduceus or divine rod very gently upon this mixture of earth and water, I saw them unite together and harden into the form of a great diamond of square figure. He said to me, Take this stone at the bottom of the vessel, look well upon it, and contemplate it at your leisure. I drew out at once this stone, which seemed heavy and cold as ice. It was smooth, polished, and lustrous like crystal, or like a fine diamond well cut. But I was much astonished, for in looking upon and considering this ravishing stone, I saw within all that one can admire of beauty in nature. I saw a natural representation of the terrestrial paradise, in the midst of which I recognized our fountain, then a green turf all enameled with flowers, in the midst of which it was placed. I saw further, in the middle of the fountain, that clod of floating earth all laden with lilies and immortal roses, planted by the hand of Pallas. I saw another wonder, far greater than all these diverse objects. I saw come forth from the pure waves of this fountain the 7 planets of heaven, which had come there to bathe. Mercury came forth first, after washing himself well therein, Saturn next, who troubled the clearness of the waters, then Jupiter, who cleansed the fountain, then the moon, whiter than snow, Venus appeared next and gave a liquid consistency to these waters, because she draws her origin from them, and raising them in subtle vapors, she gave them a charming variety of all the colors of the world. Mars then appeared, and the waters became all red by the reflection of his banners. At last the sun appeared last, as soon as Mars had gone forth. After bathing long therein, he diversified the fountain with splendors rather than with colors. And this burning god soon dried up this delightful fountain, which saw its waves harden into rubies and carbuncles, and took to itself from nature the brilliance and the fires of the sun. At last, admiring these marvels which held my eyes and my spirit enchanted, I turned to question Mercury. I was greatly surprised no longer to see him, and even more to perceive that I was issuing from a deep sleep, though I believed myself fully awake. Return of Mercury. All these marvels which I had seen in this pretended dream made so strong an impression upon my spirit that I had difficulty persuading myself it was a dream. While I was in this perplexity, Mercury appeared, helmet on head, winged sandals on feet, and caduceus in hand. Forewarned by Zephyr, he said to me, Are you well awake now? Will you take the truth of my presence for a dream? I come to teach you that what you have seen and heard in the first discourse is but a figurative prelude of our mystery. Let us leave the allegory, and give a certain and true notion of the matter, as well as of the mercury exuded in leafy earth, and the knowledge of those secret waters which the philosophers call fire. This will be the second lesson you shall have received from me. Fourth dish. True notion of the philosopher's matter. Have you never conceived the idea of that admirable embryo, wherein, by a wholly divine artifice, I have enclosed all that is necessary for our work? It is in him that sulfur and mercury are found united together by nature, not by a union that one may call a physical conjunction, which terminates in a complete mixed body with the particular idea that places it among the individuals of some species, but by a union that one must call a simple natural mixture of the principles in the form of seed, with the universal idea of the metallic species, containing the seed of the individuals that may be procreated from it. By sulfur is to be understood the first principle of metallic generation, which is the masculine seed, living, wherein air and fire dominate. Mercury is the other principle, the feminine seed, also living, wherein earth and water dominate. Both sulfur and mercury are but a hot and humid air, contained in smoke or vapor. That of sulfur has red as its share, the mercurial has white in act and red in power. These two fumes are found in the three realms to serve as principles of generation. But those of which we speak concern the mineral realm, where they have acquired a more fixed state, a purer and more constant solidity, fitting to hold the attention of the philosophers. These principles must be had all green, that is to say, living. Here I will call greenness nature itself, insofar as it is the principle of life and vegetation. In this sense certain speculators, by deep penetration, have said that all things are green. Thus this term greenness means to live, to sprout, to germinate, to vegetate. Mark then well this term greenness, which has the character that the true matter must have. I do not mean by this that it should be of a green color, I mean that it must be wholly vigorous and full of a sap of life. The principles must be pure and simple, or at least little compounded, that is to say, this first incomplete and primordial composition, easy to dissolve and to purify. You will not find it, that purity and simplicity necessary to the art, in any of the 7 metallic bodies, not even in gold nor in silver, which are of a compounded substance, wholly corporeal and material. As you need a substance that is all spirit, to penetrate like a subtle vapor, you cannot take either of those 2 beautiful bodies for your art. No mineral other than this embryo can give you these principles, though it contained gold, because minerals all have a corporeal, complete form, very imperfect, and they are but excrements, wherein these 2 principles are found neither entire, nor simple, nor pure, nor sound, nor in their vigor and greenness. If then they cannot be obtained from perfect fruits, how could you draw them from adulterated, abortive, and excrementitious fruits? Common quicksilver has been regarded by the greatest number of the scrutators of this art as a mixed body enclosing these principles in their greenness, but how much it has deceived the hope of its partisans. Likewise gold and silver and all metals, none contain this greenness of the principles, which is found only in our embryo, wherein I have placed everything pure, living, and green. This is why it has been compared to herbs. Take, says Mary the prophetess, the herb which grows upon the little mountains, and grind it quite fresh in its hour. This is the greenness that must be sought. It is no longer in those bodies where nothing remains of moisture, and where all is dry and arid, for moisture is the seat and the dwelling place of greenness and freshness, wherein life is conserved. This embryo has a real existence in nature, but it is invisible in a visible envelope. That envelope is a body which is not metallic, not made and complete in its species. Rather, it is an unformed mass which might in time acquire a metallic form. And this unformed mass has a root in the matter of all metals, minerals, and vegetables. This embryo exists under the form of a certain salt in the center of our matter, which is a certain earthy mass, without being earth, smoky, moist, and cold in its exterior, hot and dry in its interior, where light is real at the central point, while the circumference is surrounded with darkness and death. There am I, small, enslaved, and enchained. But if anyone sets me free, he draws forth all my greatness from this little point, and in recompense, I give him 7 crowns. Second Interlude. After Mercury had made so fair a description of the matter, he touched me with his caduceus, and forthwith a wind bore us both into a park where there was no water, save only that which fell in the morning from the fair eyes of the dawn. Mercury said to me, "Water is very rare in these places, which have, as you see, no other watering nor freshness than these tears. This water is the common mercury of the 3 kingdoms of nature. It is properly the vehicle of the radical elementary and alimentary moisture, and the vessel of the most gifted influences of the heavens in their movement of descent. But it is not of this, in the state wherein it is, that you have need. Before it may be proper for you, it must make a journey to the center of the world, thence to be repelled to the surface, after having passed through the hands of nature, who alone knows how to work in seed, and to make the mercury that is necessary for you. You would wait long before this water, which the nymphs gather upon the herbs and the flowers, should be converted into mercury. I will show you closely the way to draw it, which I cannot do without changing form. Take my caduceus," said he, showing me a very great stone near which we were. "When I am vanished, you shall strike with my rod the rock into which I am about to enter. You shall give the first blow on the side of the west, the second on the side of the east, the third on the side of the south. Zephyr, Auster, and Eurus shall come to execute your commands. Fifth dish." Saying this, Mercury slipped like lightning into the rock, at which I was astonished. I struck the rock vigorously on the side of the west, and immediately there came forth a brilliant flash, followed by a little fresh wind, and a jet of very pure water which leapt into the air, fell back upon the rock, and hollowed out there a basin which held it. What surprised me was to see flames mingled with these waves, which fell back pell-mell with the water in the form of white and shining stars, and were confused together in this basin. While these waters were rising into the air, I went round the rock to strike it on the east, and gave a great blow. At this rude stroke, there came forth from the rock a star brighter than the morning star, there arose a wind stronger than the first, this was followed by a water which shot upwards with such rapidity that it was rarefied into air, and instead of falling back, it formed little clouds above the rock, all shining with the colors of the iris in the form of a rainbow, and these little clouds melted away little by little and fell like a subtle dew, which ran down into a little basin hollowed in the rock. This water was more subtle than the first and of an aerial nature, and moistened the hands no more than good spirits of wine. Finally, I came to the part of the rock which faced the sun and struck a blow with the caduceus. There came forth a little sun with all its rays, followed by a moon in crescent form, whiter than silver. They were followed by a gentle and warm little wind, and amid this little wind there appeared a small jet of water which did not leap very high, for it was fatty and heavy and had the consistency of a very clear and limpid oil. It fell back also upon the same rock, which in a moment melted entirely into water before my eyes and was converted into a very great fountain surrounded by a large basin of white marble. This spectacle surprised me so strongly that I no longer thought anything impossible to the philosophers. Then I saw Pallas, Apollo, and the Muses, accompanied by chaste loves, walking upon the crystal of this clear fountain and singing verses in its praise. At that moment Mercury came forth from the fountain and said to me, laughing, "Is it a dream or a truth that you behold?" He then said to me, "Touch these waters with the tip of my caduceus." And I had no sooner touched them than instantly they appeared of all sorts of most beautiful colors. Then suddenly Mercury opened a channel beneath my feet, which in a moment swallowed up the vast expanse of those waters shining with 1,000 colors. They had so rapid and easy a current that in an instant the great basin of white marble which contained them remained dry. I gathered at the bottom some rubies, diamonds, emeralds, and pearls. Mercury then said to me, "Follow me, and you shall see the fairest things that may be seen, you shall behold objects worthy to give delight even to the gods." We walked 300 or 400 paces further, across a very pleasant little valley, and descended it, and at its foot we saw a kind of terrace constructed in the form of a temple. He told me that the walls of this temple were double, and that between these two walls there was at least half a foot of empty space, that what appeared to me as a temple was but the model or mold of one which was about to appear there, after this terrace should have fallen. Saying this, he removed a stone from the mouth of the channel which ended at this figure of the temple. At once our fair waters, which had been stopped, poured impetuously into the space between the walls of the mold of the temple and filled it up to the top. This hollow terrace swallowed all the water from the basin, so that not a drop remained in the channel. Immediately Mercury made me touch this terrace with his rod. What was my surprise to see forthwith this hollow mass, both inside and out, as well as our fair waters, frozen with all their admirable colors, changed into clear and transparent walls which formed the most superb palace. Description of the temple. Here the author describes a temple, the exterior of which was of one piece, as if it were cast, supported by a great number of pillars and flying buttresses of diverse colors, and surrounded by 100 columns of jasper, agate, and other precious stones. The whole was of composite order, wherein none of the 7 moldings were lacking. Between these columns were figures of gods and goddesses. Above rose a pyramid of gold, at its 2/3 a second and third crown which bore a cross. The facade was adorned with a colonnade of sandstone. Between every 2 columns stood statues of men famous for their science. Upon the facade rose 2 towers, one wholly of sandstone, the other of alabaster. Description of the interior. At the entrance of this temple was a spacious portico, vaulted in a rainbow, shining with all colors. At the back rose an altar, made of an emerald, surmounted by a figure of the Virgin and of a single diamond, the head of which was adorned with a crown of 12 carbuncles in the form of a star. Around this statue 7 columns of rubies in the form of a canopy supported a column of gold set with gems. The vault was blue, charged with stars like the firmament. The narrow nave was supported by 16 pillars representing the evangelist apostles in precious stones. The walls on either side, in 3 stories, were transparent and painted like tapestries. The first represented what fable has of the most beautiful, the second, what profane history has of the most illustrious, and the third, the whole of sacred history. I went out and found Mercury at the end of a long alley of lemon and orange trees which he had planted while I was considering all these fair things. He said to me, "Come see the 3 origins and their 3 sources in the 3 kingdoms of nature." He led me upon very high rocks. Between them was a meadow and a plain. There he showed me 3 figures. The first, of alabaster, represented a naked form whose breasts gave forth milk. Upon her belly was written, "Animal Nature." The second was a young man crowned with ivy, seated upon a barrel from which gushed a divine fountain that fell into a golden cup. Upon the barrel was written, "Vegetable Kingdom." The third represented 2 frightful dragons, whose tails seemed to issue only halfway from the rock, though their heads stretched forth over the middle of the basin. One of them was winged, the other without wings. From the mouth of the first flowed a stream of very clear water, and from that of the dragon without wings a little thread of oil. 2 satyrs received these 2 liquors in crystal vials, and upon these dragons was written, "Mineral Kingdom." Turning again toward the temple, I saw on both sides of the avenue that the spaces between the trees were filled by satyrs of philosophers in white marble. They had been given attitudes conformable to their genius, some held a globe, others mathematical instruments. Mercury said to me, "I will show you the origin of the 3 sources which you have just seen." Striking the earth with his foot, there came forth a wind which bore us to the inaccessible summit of those 3 rocks. Their height frightened me. From there I saw the temple all clear, and its great statues seemed to me but pygmies. I perceived many blind men wandering about the environs of that solitude. These unfortunates leapt for joy when they had touched one of those figures, and returned as blind as they had come, flattering themselves that they saw clearly. Instead of coming to our sources, they went to throw themselves into a pool, whose waters were foul, miry, and full of monsters. Their misfortune came from their ignorance of a herb which was at the entrance of the avenue. Had they but taken it and rubbed their eyes with it, they would have found the natural sources and not been lost. They trample this herb every day beneath their feet, but their presumption blinds them. Mercury then said to me, "Come and see the origin of the world." We descended very low, by aid of a carbuncle which he placed in the mouth of one of the two dragons. When we reached the last steps, he showed me the caverns of the earth in the midst of a vast extent of void. The center of this expanse was occupied by a spherical body, surrounded by 12 other globes, which are the 12 figures of the zodiac. These bodies revolved with such rapidity that there arose a wind blowing continually without interruption. He said to me, "This wind descends from the heavens, it is launched into these lower places upon the 12 signs above, and the 12 signs below hurl it back in their turn. This wind is the spirit of the stars, when it rises again, it returns as spirit of the earth. It is he who does all in the world, he adds the colors and the flavors, he holds both light and darkness in his domain." He showed me how around the terrestrial globe those three sources, which draw their origin from this wind, are maintained by that nourishment which is communicated to them by the breath of the lower signs. I saw that it was the superior breath which set the inferior in motion and made it breathe. I saw that both superior and inferior signs inhaled and exhaled. This breath was a subtle vapor in the secret conduits that issued into the three sources. I recognized that without this concord the universe could not subsist, and that the above and the below have a marvelous correspondence, as Hermes says. Thus this influence, thrown back by the inferior signs, is a seed of life all prepared, from which are born the three kingdoms. We ascended the stair again. Upon coming out of its cavern, the little wind bore us to the door of the temple, where I saw all the impurities of the terrace, or mold of the temple, fallen and cast without. I entered within. I saw at the four corners 4 steps or stairways. I ascended one, which led me straight to the belfry, where I saw 2 medium bells of silver and 2 of malleable glass. There I found a genius who had the government of them, and who had others under him in other towers, to whom he gave the signal to ring when he willed. Which he did by sounding his own. At once I heard ring 7 bells, which are those of the 7 planets, each making its part. They were known by their sound, Saturn making the bass. I went into the other towers, where I thought to see the bell of the sun and that of the other planets. I was surprised to see that these 7 bells had no other body than the colors of the 7 planets, and that they were in a single vessel of glass, and that their sound was nothing but the mingling of their colors, which formed a harmony intelligible to the spirit. On coming out from there, the genii wished to be paid. Not knowing how to satisfy them, they told me that it was the money of philosophers they required, and that this money was breath of wind. Then I blew 30 or 40 times upon their noses, and they were content. They told me that gold or silver, material as they are made of the proper essence of wind. As there were marble benches in the avenue, Mercury said to me, "Come sit down. I am going to give you aid in our science, for all that you have seen done by virtue of my caduceus has a marvelous relation to the work of the philosophers. By this rock, which when struck with the caduceus cast forth 3 sources of living water, understand the matter struck by the rod of the magical fire, which dissolves all into water as easily as that rock melted into a kind of sea. The west, or occident, where you began to strike this stone, marks the wind that is called Zephyr. It is Zephyr who first of all opens this matter by the gifted moisture of a tepid bath, whose heat, imitating the warmth of the springtime vapor bath which is apparative, begins by its sweetness to excite the elements enclosed in our matter, and makes it shed tears. Eurus, which is the east wind, is the nourisher of flowers. He is the second who begins to rain. When Zephyr has poured his waters and moistened the fields, the eastern wind, finding the earths opened, brings forth from them the spirit of life, to which has been given the name of air, because all that lives in the universe lives by that air, which is the spirit of heaven, and of that air which I showed you at the center of the world, whence it rises again every spring to give life to the 3 kingdoms, as well as to vegetation. You have seen flames, lightnings, and stars among these spirits, to signify that the philosophers call these waters their fire. You have heard the breathings of imperious winds and the strokes of thunder. This marks that this spirit is the matter of wind and thunder, whose effects are equally terrible and admirable. Auster is the south wind, hot and agreeable, who, because of his gifted warmth, is the father of all nature. He makes the nature of the radical moisture in all things. It is a moisture, unctuous and viscous. I have marked him to you by the south wind, but I shall afterwards explain their convenances and their relations to our work. By that channel wherein you saw the waters swallowed, understand the distillation of the spirits. By the admirable temple which was raised from the congelation of those waters, understand the perfect and accomplished work, where all these correspondences are just, as well with regard to the mysteries of our religion as to all the works of nature. The figure of the Holy Virgin, which holds the place of honor, was not employed by chance. If you examine well the principle of the work, you will find the convenance just and the application natural. The 16 pillars with their verdure and their devices mark the 16 months of cooking that must be awaited for the last perfection, and because there is no month wherein there does not arrive some feast of an apostle. The verdure marks the vegetation during the time of the work. The devices have a mystical sense referring to the glory of God and of the apostles, and partly to wisdom. The rest is understood of itself. If I have entrusted you with my caduceus to perform great things by its virtue, learn from this that the wise man rises by his virtue and his science above the common condition of men. By this elevation he draws near to the favor of God, who loves wise men as a mirror upon which his divinity causes to shine the rays of his light and goodness. Learn, finally, that nature obeys a philosopher as it does God himself, who has subjected her to his power, provided that he requires of her only what is possible for her, and this by simple ways which she knows, provided that he acts with her by caressing her, without violence. By those whirlwinds of wind which bore you above your strength, understand that the power of the wise is above the reach of ordinary man, and that wind is necessary for you to succeed, and to fly upon those high mountains, that is to say, you shall never accomplish the work without the philosophical sublimation. You shall never sublimate unless your matter dilates, rarefies, subtilizes, rises in vapors, for these vapors are our whirlwind of wind. By our prison you may perhaps understand that the sulfur of which you are in need is imprisoned in the mass of your matter, whence it must be set free by the virtue of the caduceus. You doubt no longer of the reality of the work, although there are learned men who doubt it, because they have not seen the fountain and the origin of nature, and know not that wind is the first principle of things. For these ignorants, when they wish to mock the sciences and despise them, say that we make only wind, not knowing how truly they speak, since this matter is indeed but wind. But this wind is a fat wind which blows from the south, which loads the trees with manna, the flowers with honey, and the herbs with dew which the dawn sheds upon them in the morning like a rain of melted diamonds and flashing rubies. Of the exuberant Mercury. After this general idea of our mysteries, it is time to come to the general knowledge of the principles of the work, and to explain the terms and the equivocations which the masters have employed to conceal the science. The greatest of all the equivocations lies in the term Mercury. Besides the notion we have already given above of sulfur and mercury, it must still be said here, in general terms, that by sulfur is meant the dry and the hot of the matter which holds the fire, and by the term mercury is to be understood the moist of the same matter. But since there are two sorts of moisture, one cold, having relation to the moisture of water, on account of which it is called aqueous moisture, the other warm, having relation to the element of air, on account of which it is called aerial, there arises a double mercury, which gives occasion to the equivocation. For of these two mercuries there is composed that part of the mixed body which we call phlegm, which, since it springs from the moist, is a key to open the door to generation or to destruction. Yet this is not the true mercury which we seek, but it is a hook to draw it forth. The other mercury, which we seek, and which is the true, is that which is born of the moisture of the aerial humid. It constitutes that second part of the mixed body which we call spirit. This spirit is the radical moisture and the true principle of life and generation in all things. To speak among themselves, and in terms unknown to the vulgar, they have called it air, a name very proper, because it suits its nature. They have also named it magnet and steel, improperly and by comparison, the element that draws to itself the air, and the steel that lets itself be drawn by the magnet. In this they mean that this true mercury is the steel, which lets itself be drawn, with the phlegm, and a magnet with regard to that part of the mixed body which is called salt, oil, or fire, which it in turn draws to itself. It is in this sense that one must understand the cosmopolite and philoliths when they speak of the steel and magnet of the philosophers. This was a necessary remark to get out of this labyrinth. To confuse still more, though there is but one Mercury, they have made of it a Mercury of nature, one of the bodies, one of the philosophers, one common, one vulgar, one simple, and one compounded. The Mercury of nature is that of which I have just spoken, which I have named air, radical moisture, spirit of life. To know its nature, I refer you to the 5th chapter of The Light Coming Out of Darkness, which amply treats of its path of descent. It is the wind or the air of the heavens, which bears in its bosom the fecundity of the sun. It is the vapor of the elements of the nature of the superior waters, bearing naturally in its breast the spirit of light and the true fire of nature. It is the purest portion of that chaos, and in this state it is young or virgin. But in the path of ascent consider it when it mounts corporified and congealed with the inferior elements, under a saline, earthy, and obscure form. It is the radical moisture of things, which, beneath various scoriae, does not fail to conserve its first origin, though its splendor be tarnished by its alliance newly contracted with the nature of water. It is a most pure virgin who has not lost her virginity. Though she is found in the public places, and though generation has caused her to pass from her mother's womb into all the bodies of the 3 kingdoms, the common Mercury is the true wind which carries the simple fire of the sun in its bosom, and the air of the sages, the mean substance of water, and the secret fire. It is he who distributes them from the center to all the minds, who serves as nourishment to the mineral bodies, and who holds in his breast the metallic essence. The vulgar Mercury is one of the imperfect and useless metallic bodies. The Mercury of the philosophers is the exuberant Mercury, thus named by Lully and some others. It is not sold, it is not known, it is found only in the storehouses of the philosophers. And although this radical moisture, this spirit of life, this air of the philosophers, may also be said, in a proper sense, to be the philosopher's Mercury, it is only of our exuberant Mercury that one is to be understood when speaking under that name. They have also given it the names of iron, of Saturn, of the true Diana, of the sap of metals, of mean substance, of quicksilver, of magnesia, of salt of nature, of ammoniac, of sulfur of nature. By all these specious names is meant the same air above mentioned, sublimed with its same body well prepared, sublimed in such sort that it is a leafy earth, of resplendent whiteness, which is a dry water that does not wet, which is nevertheless made of that Mercury called air, which wets before being congealed and sublimed. It is this sublimed Mercury that is called the child of the philosophers, whose birth they have so much sung, and of which we have said above that the time must be known. It is in this sublimation that the 2 serpents of my caduceus unite, namely sulfur and mercury. This is done thus: the spirit and the body, well purified, the spirit by 7 rectifications, the body by 2 solar calcinations artificial, then the spirit, or air, restored upon its earth to prepare itself therein, 1 part upon 4. The thirsty body, which is here called sulfur, inflames and engulfs this spirit, which, fugitive, spreads its wings to fly toward its native land, and finds itself stopped by the sulfur which flies with it, pursues it up to the top of the vessel, without either being able to separate. For Saturn, surprising them in this amorous brazier, launches upon them a dart of ice which congeals them in a moment. And if he had not used such great speed in hurling that dart of ice, so tender were their loves that the fugitive soul would have quitted its body forever, and the artist would have remained frustrated in his expectation. Of the fires of the philosophers. There are properly 3, without troubling myself to explain the external fires, but only those which the philosophers have so greatly hidden, and which, as Protheus says, if there is artifice in finding them, there is no less in knowing them. The first is named against nature, the second, unnatural, the third, natural. The fire against nature is a water called fire by comparison, since fire itself, with all its activity, could not do what this accomplishes in the hands and by the industry of the philosopher. This is the first water which is applied to the subject to dissolve it, and it brings this about by the skill of the artist. It is what all the fires of the world could never accomplish, for it is also called mercury. It is the first key to obtain it. It issues from the same subject, yet it is originally but an envelope and is not of the essence nor the matter of the true mercury. It is a bastard and adulterine mercury, yet half-brother of the true mercury, sprung from the same body. By reason of its foreign nature, the philosophers have said it was taken elsewhere than from the matter. This sophism has led astray an infinity of artists who sought this dissolvent in foreign things, contrary to metallic nature, imagining they would find some resemblance of nature in which it might unite, what they never found, to their great loss, deceived by the literal sense of the philosophers, who would not even take the trouble to distinguish so. It is taken from elsewhere than from the matter. I distinguish it from another substance than sulfur and mercury of the matter, I grant it, from another subject than that which contains the sulfur and the mercury, I deny it. To explain this distinction, it must be known that this first water, though it be not of the essence of sulfur and mercury, is nevertheless contained in the subject which contains also sulfur and mercury. And this first water, having proximity and affinity with the essential parts of the subject, draws them to itself and sets them in motion. The philosophers have said of it that it was not mercury. They called it fire against nature because it corrupts and unbinds first what nature had strongly bound, and dissolves the compound immediately by its action. They called it vulgar fire, lunatic, because it does to its body what the moon does to the lower elements and sublunary things, which she corrupts by her cold humidity. They called it the urine of Saturn, because, as time devours all things, so this precious water is a principle of corruption, both for the generation and for the death of all sublunary bodies. It is a hot spirit, enemy of rest, destroying and decomposing all by its crudity. They also named it fire against nature because it is a water, and it is not natural that fire be water nor water fire, this is against the nature of both. The unnatural fire is a term invented by the philosophers to distinguish this fire from the preceding and from the fire of nature. Unnatural here means properly a substance wholly aerial, midway between the qualities of water and of fire, because mercury is called by the name of air, which holds the middle between fire and water, for to one side it agrees with water by the humid, and yet is not water, and to the other side with fire by the hot, and yet is not fire, being of a quality to accommodate itself with both. It combats the nature of neither, but is so much in affinity with both that it often takes the form of water and of fire, particularly when forced by the philosopher, whom the elements obey when he is wise and skillful. But this borrowed form is not natural and proper to it, as that of air is, which is its unnatural form, that is, non-natural. Many philosophers, whether through envy or perhaps through affected inadvertence, have often confounded this fire with the preceding, though very different. For this one is the essential mercury, which manifests itself in the distillations by the dissolution which is made by the most subtle portion of the volatile salt. The preceding is not a salt dissolved, but only an external moisture. If the form of water and that of fire are not natural to this fire, as we have said, yet they are not so foreign to it that it cannot take them and clothe itself in them as neighbor and friend of both, perfectly sustaining the nature and property of the air, which is its name. Thus it shows that, being susceptible of every natural form, corporeal and spiritual, hot or cold, moist or dry, it is the true mercury and the Protheus of nature, in which all contraries find a mediator to reconcile them without warring. It is therefore the simple natural mercury, from which, joined with sulfur by the industry of philosophers, there must be born the true artificial mercury, which we have said above is called leafy earth, our white magnesia, and our newborn child. It also serves as dissolvent with the preceding, before the philosophers have separated them, and alone by itself after it has been separated. The preceding, which is a fire against nature, separates itself from the dissolved fire as foreign, but this one congeals and is taken again with its dissolved body under the same form, after having dissolved, calcined, washed, purified, and sublimed it with itself. It destroys it only to re-establish it better. And because the air is hot and of a nature loving of fire, which is the true principle of life in all things, it has been compared to Venus, as the first water has been compared to the moon, following the philosopher's saying, Sidera Veneris edi corniculata Diani tibi propitia sunt, may the stars of Venus and the horn Diana be propitious to you. By these words are designated these fires in figurative terms. The last is called the milk of the winged virgin, the argent water, the living wave, Diana, the great light, the water of life, the very sharp vinegar, the precious pearl of the philosophers, Bea, and by an infinity of other names, by comparison with that which is most beautiful and best in nature. The natural fire is nothing other than the dissolution of the fixed salt, which gives sulfur more digested and more ripe than the purple of the light of the sun, I mean the red tincture. They have also said of it that it is taken from elsewhere than from the matter, because it is extracted from the earth by the means of air, and the earth, during this extraction, appears black and afterwards becomes altered and altogether other than it was at the beginning, because of the change the work has wrought therein. But this fire is a balm of life, and life itself, it is the best of all substances. Not only is it of the essence, but it is that which constitutes the essence. It is the living gold and the true son of the philosophers, that illustrious captive, that noble prisoner, who gives 7 kingdoms to his liberator and multiplies the royal purple of gold unto infinity. In these 3 notions consists the most essential of the theory, for it is a great point to know what the matter is, and where one must take it. And it is further essential to know the water, the air, the oil, and to know that these 3 moistures are 3 fires, all drawn from the same subject, contrary to the literal sense of the philosophers. Nor is it less essential to science to know the form of Mercury, of which we have sketched the outline, without appealing to authority, a god being worth more than all the authors of the world, who knew only what it pleased him to inspire them with. Second part. Of the practice. The work of the philosophers has several parts, namely the cooking, the imbibitions, which are the fermentation and the multiplication. I reduce these various parts into 3 works. The first is called xir, the second xir or isir, the third elixir. Now, the philosophers have never said in what consisted the operation of xir, which is the most laborious, the most painful, and the most essential of the 3 works. They have therefore passed it over entirely in silence through envy, and all admit that they mistake the first water for their mercury and for their dissolvent, qualifying by this name the second water, which they esteem to be their essential mercury, giving it the name of air. Likewise also the preparation, according to them, is not the work of the philosophers. They do not count it in their labors, saying that it belongs to rustic folk to give themselves to an occupation so low and so vile, which corresponds not at all to the dignity of a man of letters. The reason for this great indifference and affected contempt is that this preparation ends in a coagulation which is made of sulfur and mercury by cold. They esteem it unworthy of a man of letters because it is altogether similar to a chemical operation, and very different from the physical work, which ends in a congelation that is made by heat. The Cosmopolite says on this subject, "If anyone knows how to congeal water by heat, assuredly he has found a thing 1,000 times more precious than gold." You have also the author of The Light Coming Out of Darkness, who, on this first congelation by cold, says very well that the vessel must be sealed by winter, and that it is by the cold that one retains the guest in the house. Upon which one remarks that by the water of Hermes the philosophers chiefly meant the conjunction of sulfur and mercury, otherwise of the 2 dragons, which, when it is doubled, forms leafy earth. This is made under the auspices of cold Saturn, who, coming upon them, congeals them. And the moment of the cold congelation is the moment of the birth. Hermes was the first to speak of it in these terms. When that which is of hot nature meets the cold, or that which is cold by nature comes to meet the hot, it shall not harm it. Plato says enough to be understood when he says, "Heat must be opposed at the hour of its birth or of its congelation." The Tuba says thus, "Know that you shall not attain the color of purple save by the cold." Here then, according to all these authorities, is a great discovery of what is most essential in the work, which is made in the preparation whereby the cult is rendered manifest by the birth of the child of the philosophers, whose operation shall be described thus, in its place, thereby the matter is sealed in its natural vessel by the true seal of Hermes, which is made by this congelation of mercury and sulfur, the one being the proper and natural vessel of the other. It is in this that consists the first crown of the work and this first degree of perfection, which, by means of sublimation, is acquired by him who well understands these truths. Particular operation of this work. Arnaud de Villeneuve says that one must begin by separating the elements, which are those of which we have spoken above, namely this water, this air, this fire or oil, or this red earth of the matter, from which art extracts them by distillation. Virgil has touched not only upon the labor, but also the matter, by these words. First, by strong bulls, by the breath of Zephyr, the rich earth or mass of earth is loosened and opened. Without any figure or equivocation, he marks the matter, which in this sense is the true one. For indeed it must be a rich earth, fresh and new, in order that it may be more vegetative, humid, and spirituous, and in its great greenness, which is then communicated by the spirit, or renovating Mercury, when it rises from the center to transmit it to all sensitive and inanimate beings. The young and strong bulls applied to this labor are none other than the strong and vigorous spirits of the matter, and on the other hand the external fires which are the instruments of this art. This lump or mass, foul by the impure sulfurs of its exterior, full in order to serve as an envelope to the light which is hidden therein, is dissolved by Zephyr, which is a little gentle wind blowing from the west. Since the poet has said that this foul mass is dissolved by Zephyr, it is needful to learn what he is. The Zephyr of the philosophers. The royal prophet has spoken this little word of the breath of God, which is the wind, teaching us that it is he who makes the waters flow. Stabit spiritus aegis edi flavit aquas. Our little western Zephyr is a wind proper to make the waters of our matter flow. This Zephyr is but a wind. Remember that Hermes says that the wind bore it in its belly. He means the son of the sun, which is fire, the soul and life of the wind, that is to say, of our air. And our air is its nourishment, being the true vehicle of fire, as the body is the vehicle of the spirit. But it is particularly when it is borne upward by sublimation and the rarefaction of the air that this fire, or son of the sun, takes strength, in proportion as with the air it is dilated into vapors, because nature requires only a tender fire. Philosophers, poets, and prophets are all of one accord upon this point. You wish to know what is the western Zephyr which is said to make the physical waters of the matter flow. Learn, my friend, that the first spirit which issues from our matter is compared to our downstream wind, which blows from the west, and never blows without giving rain. It is he who is our first key. This Zephyr is what the philosophers and the chemists despise and reject from their work. They call it phlegm, and use it not as philosophers, but only as chemists, in that it enters not into their precious work. This spirit is of the same color as the true Mercury. It is clear, limpid, crystalline, but insipid, very crude, enemy of congelation and of the universal author of conceptions, and even of generations, in which it mingles as a principle of mutation, of alteration, of corruption, and of death. I say a second time, that men often do not understand what is told them, not at the first time, nor the second, nor even the 10th, nor the 100th. I tell you this by the way, to show you the excellence of God, who, if he did not place great shadows in the understanding of mortals, they would be gods before their death, as they draw near to being after their decease. But let us return to our subject and speak of the practice. Practice of the first work. You must first make provision of at least 60 pounds of matter, taken all fresh and newly brought from the places where nature has formed it. You must distill what you can. This distillation will be toilsome, laborious, and wearisome, the more so as it must be made at an insensible, imperceptible heat. Draw from it what you can of this water, which will be but a simple phlegm, yet of admirable virtue for the beginning. Coabate and digest upon the same putrefied matter, often redistill and coabate. It dissolves powerfully all the matter into water, applying 3 parts of water against 1 of matter or earth. But it is necessary to be prudent and advised in sharpening the virtue of this agent, powerful though it be. This is accomplished by reiterations and distillations. This repetition dissolves little by little the volatile salt of the matter. This dissolved salt mingles with it, strengthens it, and sharpens it. A pound of this phlegm suffices to dissolve as much matter as you wish, however great the quantity. You will know that it is no small labor to obtain 1 pound, still less several. Hence many, to mark the fatigue of such a rude labor, have said that it is a labor of giants. The fire must be governed, repose observed, the weight equalized, the time attained, and the artist must be patient, remembering that all precipitation comes from the devil. The phlegm must often be distilled, coabated, and redistilled after being digested. Each distillation brings with it some portion of the true mercury, to which has been given the name of air. The phlegm rises and stretches forth because it is its magnet, hence they have given them the names of magnet and steel by comparison. Thus after the fourth distillation, and after having separated the air from the phlegm and rectified this air 7 times until it becomes brilliant and crystalline of itself, one proceeds no more to distillation save by it alone. This air, thus rectified, is poured again upon its own body, into which it penetrates like a cutting knife, and by repeated distillations, followed by convenient digestions, it carries away the rest of the air that has remained in the body as the most obstinate part. This is continued as long as there is moisture in the same body, always distilling at an imperceptible fire. As for the phlegm which has been separated from the air, it is employed for new matters from which one wishes to draw other air and other oil, proceeding always in the same manner and always separating the air from the phlegm. After the fourth distillation, joining all the phlegms together and all the airs together, to strengthen them and increase their quantity, for one has need of all these substances well worked and in good quantity. This air, thus rectified, is again put upon the digested matter as before, and after having dissolved all the volatile salt, draws to itself all the air remaining, then being replaced upon its body with the new air it has attracted, it powerfully attacks the fixed salt, dissolves it, raises it, and draws it in the distillation in the form of oil, which is the element of fire, which the air makes come forth and delivers from its prison, drying it in the bottom of its black earth, where it reposed like a governor in his fortress. But one lesser than he makes him yield, not by force, but of his own free will, because he cannot separate from him, the air being the element of fire as the phlegm is that of air. Lully says that there must be at least 20 or 22 distillations to obtain all the fires of the matter, giving to each distillation a suitable digestion as I have said, which he assures he accomplished in 7 months. If one works upon diverse portions of matter in diverse alembics, all must be conducted by the same rules, and one must make good provision of these 3 spirits, phlegm, air, and oil, putting each apart in well-stopped vials. Thus are obtained the 3 elements of the mineral earth. When the earth is void of its spirits and its elements, it must be calcined, whitened, and roasted, triturated, rendered subtle, avid, and thirsty, citibond. To do this operation more perfectly, the mirror of a great volume would be of great assistance to those who seek to assist by nature. It is not absolutely necessary, but I maintain with Valentine that the limes acquire in this calcination a virtue and a force altogether celestial. By this son of the sun the limes become whiter, more gifted and more spongy, more salutary and more natural, being well calcined in a sealed vessel in this fire, and often triturated in a dry place and in the sun, if possible, so that this lime, extremely attractive, draw not from the air some superfluous moisture. It is by this noble and celestial fire that Mary the prophetess obtained the shortest abbreviation of the work. It is also the secret of Agricola, or the little peasant, who learned to do the work in 30 days. Sign of the perfect calcination. When one casts a little of this lime or calcined earth upon a plate reddened in the fire, and it gives forth no smoke, and it is as subtle as fine flour, then it is ready, and one must proceed to the impregnation. When one has recognized this sign, there remains in this earth nothing but a fermentative virtue, in which the metallic species is conserved with the power of taking up again and congealing those spirits, and this by the virtue of its own substance, which is nothing other than a living and permanent sulfur, which is the root and foundation of metallicity. For this reason the philosophers have rightly given it the name of sulfur. To engender the philosophical child, it is necessary to impregnate this prepared earth. Here is the touchstone. Of all difficulties, it is the greatest to surmount. It is in this impregnation that one must be wise, prudent, and advised, and must have good judgment not to miss the mark. Here is how this important operation is accomplished. Since it is a matter of congealing what was dissolved at the beginning, it follows that this operation may be contrary to the dissolution, because the first work opens, and this one closes. Thus one proceeds in a wholly balanced manner. One begins, therefore, with weight, in the name of the Holy Trinity who has made all things. We take this brilliant air, purified by 7 rectifications, which are the eagles that fly above the 7 planets. And whereas we first put 3 parts of phlegm upon 1 part of earth to dissolve it, Here on the contrary we put only 1 part of air upon 3 of our lime, or prepared earth. She drinks it eagerly and coagulates it. This dose of air and earth is repeated so many times that this fertile mother, becoming pregnant little by little, and by repeating this operation often, at length brings forth our young king. If any doubt should come upon you, consult the doctors, Lully, the Rosary, and Ripley, and above all Servetus. They have particularly well described this operation. I refer you to their writings in case of need. This birth is admirable. It has been sung by all the philosophers as a prodigy of nature and of art. This work is so great that they have given it the name of childbirth, because, as childbirth is the greatest effect of nature, so also this operation, which, like nature, with nature and by nature, brings into the world a creature engendered of 2 sperms, and produces a thing which has life without soul, body and spirit from the masculine seed, sulfur, and the feminine seed, mercury. Not only is this work compared to ordinary childbirth, but even to that of a virgin, surpassing the course of nature. It is a work that partakes of prodigy. To behold this new son born, one must have well accomplished the impregnation of the earth, and immediately, without any delay, proceed to what follows. Physical sublimation. To succeed in this noble operation, one must employ the tepid bath, hot ashes, and fire, and almost sudden cold coming soon after, not, however, all at once, by applying something cold or by ice, for the vessels would break. One must be a good artist to perform this operation well. I will repeat it more exactly, that you may not miss it. Take of the earth well prepared and ground, like fine flour, very white and well disposed to receive these spirits. Place 3 parts of this earth in a cucurbit, pour upon it 1 part of air, set the blind head upon it and lute well. Leave all at a gentle fire until the earth has drunk this spirit. Place again upon this dried earth 3 parts of earth and 1 part of spirit, and let it dry as the first time, during 2 or 3 days. Repeat always the same in the same quantities, so long as you have earth and air. If it should happen that in the prescribed time this earth, accustomed to drink its moisture and to dry with it, has not absorbed and swallowed it, withdraw the superfluous which floats above, and dry it by a slow and gentle distillation. And when all shall be dry, again add earth and air, if you have it, in the same weight as before. Proceed always thus until the earth is impregnated with its spirit and ready to bring forth. Here are 2 signs of perfect impregnation. The first is known by the weight of the earth, which must be weighed after calcination, and after proceeding to impregnation, weighed again. If it weighs a 4th part more than before the impregnation, it is a sign it has taken what it ought of the spirit and is all ready to bring forth. The second sign is known by its volatility. If you heat to redness a plate of gold or of silver and throw a little of it thereon, it must fly away with the spirit, leaving nothing upon the plate. Then you may be certain that since the earth does not abandon its spirit, but flies with it in proportion, it is ready to be sublimed. If you press it with a little fire, it will rise with its fugitive spirit and not leave it. If, on the contrary, some earth remains on the plate, its sponginess is not penetrated with the spirit, and it is a sign it is not sufficiently imbibed. It must again be watered with its air, as above, until you see the sign. When this sign is constant, have your furnace ready with hot ashes, and at the same time withdraw your cucurbit from the bain-marie. Place it immediately upon the warm ashes, covered with its blind head. Push the fire a little, making it sufficient to heat the ashes. The spirit will no sooner feel the point of the fire than it will spread its wings to return to its native land. And the body, become volatile and spiritual, will so well dilate at that moment that, rising with the spirit, they cannot be separated. And as the spirit lifts the body holds back the spirit and retains its flight, as Zachary says, by its natural weight. They will rise no further than the head of the cucurbit, or, remaining sublime there of a dazzling whiteness, congealed together like a sort of silvery ice in leafy earth, delicate beyond all expression. All this will be happily accomplished if at the moment of their elevation you extinguish the fire so opportunely that the cold comes to congeal them and unite them together. This is that operation so important and so great, without which one cannot succeed in the work. Success is certain if one is fortunate enough to perform it well. It depends upon the degree of fire to be given under the ashes, and upon the cold arriving immediately. For if the fire did not cease at the right moment, all would be lost, because the earth and the spirits, subliming into the head of the vessel, would leave all the impure at the bottom, into which the mercury would return and unhappily precipitate itself. Should this happen, the evil would be without remedy, for no artifice could ever separate it. This would indubitably occur if the fire did not cease and the cold did not come. There are 3 signs of the degree of fire required for this operation. The first is that little of this snow rises. This shows that the fire is not strong enough, and it must be increased. The second is that much rises, mixed with impurities, and that the color is obscure and not of a shining, resplendent white. This shows that the fire is too strong, and it must be diminished. The third is that, if the sublimation is abundant and pure, of a snow-white brilliance, one has happily found the true degree, which must be continued. These 3 signs must be well studied and observed. One must take them for guide, with all the more diligence because this sublimation is done in an hour, by heat and by cold. The philosophers are formal upon this, and all speak of an hour for this sublimation. Philalethes says in express terms, speaking of the child of the philosophers, who is thus born in the air. If anyone knows how to seize it at the hour of its birth, remark this term hour, it is as if he said, if one knows this great secret so hidden and so difficult, to profit by the precise hour in which it is sublimed and rises into the air, where it takes birth. Sublimation is accomplished and perfected in the ashes by a light fire. Protheus adds, the first part is not fixed unless it be joined to the second, and in the first hour. Zachary, page 84 of his little work, second part, which treats only of this fatal hour, says, if one misses this hour, one misses all. To mark its importance, they imagined the fable of Daedalus and Icarus his son, who made himself wings of wax to fly from the labyrinth. Icarus, flying too near the sun, melted his wings and drowned in the sea. Daedalus signifies the sulfur of nature, sublimed and coagulated physically and philosophically. Icarus is the mercury sublimed and coagulated, but melted and lost by too much fire, in the Icarian Sea. These passages show that this operation is so delicate that, without application and great diligence, without dexterity, it is difficult to succeed, unless one takes his measures well. For these substances of quicksilver and sulfur are so tender, so delicate, and so volatile, that loss may easily come, unless one take care to avoid it by great fidelity to the work, punctual exactitude, and finally an invincible courage in labor. I end this chapter by telling you that the later authors have more envy than the ancients. Witness the author of the light coming out of darkness, speaking of this earth sublimed with its spirit, calls it the worm which must be drawn from the ashes with skill. This can never be understood by a student who has never heard speak of this operation, and who, like those resembling him, makes books which can profit no one, not even the children of the science, predestined to gather its fruits. To mark how displeasing to me is this envy, I write this science for you in clear terms, that the students who shall read this after you may one day recognize their error and know that this leafy and sublimed earth, or this first sublimation and coagulation, must not be taken for the work of the white. I make this observation because it is your error, and had you not mistaken it for the stone of the white, you would long since have attained it. Behold your stumbling stone, and that of many others. The envious are nearly all those who have written of the science, more out of vanity than out of zeal for truth, or to instruct in the true principles of this art. Third part. First operation of the philosophers according to them, and the second according to us. After the impregnation of the earth, in which you have put 1/4 part of air to 3 parts of prepared earth, to serve for the sublimation of the leafy earth, which is the king that is born to us, there remains air of which you must have made good provision for your need, and particularly for the operation now at hand, wherein it is a matter of raising the king and nourishing him, making him grow, giving him strength, and leading him to the highest perfection. You must therefore have made 2 portions of your air, one, which has been coagulated with the earth, has taken the name of body, brass, child, the other has taken the name of Azoth, and retained that of spirit and milk, spirit to volatilize and spiritualize the body, azoth to wash the brass, and milk of the virgin to nourish and rear our royal child. The philosophers, after the birth, begin with the doses of the first work, which here is the second, consisting in taking of our white magnesia, or sublimed leafy earth, 1½ parts, and of our azoth, our earth, our virginal milk, otherwise our spirit, which are one and the same thing, that is, one and the same mercury, 1½ parts. This makes 3 or 2 equal parts. These 3 parts, mixed at first, are 3 nymphs who await 7 others that will come thereafter to join these 3, and all together will compose the number of those 10 fair nymphs who will come to the palace of the king. You will therefore take 3 equal parts of leafy earth and of air. So dispose the doses of each that there remains to you 9 times more air than you put of leafy earth, because what remains is to serve for the imbibitions when the child has taken and drunk the milk of his mother. Put these 3 equal parts together, shut them in a clear and clean vessel of very good glass able to bear the fire, stopper it very hermetically, and if you fear that the great fire necessary for the seal of Hermes cannot be made without risking your preparations, contrive another manner of stopping so well that the extremely volatile spirits are held and do not fly off. Make whatever seal you please, provided it restrains the flight of the spirits, it will be good. Make such fire as pleases you, provided it be equal, of 1 degree and almost insensible, and that it only excites the natural heat of the matter to set the elements in motion. It must be regulated on the warmth of spring which, though scarcely felt at the beginning of that season, nevertheless causes all to green and vegetate. This work is called Ixer. You will await with much patience that the Ixer drink the mercury which you have given to it. In this cooking, if you proceed well, you ought to see the whole order of colors described by the philosophers. Black will appear first, and after the black, much green and yellow one after the other, with great brilliance, and little red. In this beginning you will have operated well. It is the sign that the matter has received a proper fire and that it vegetates like herbs and flowers. When you see that the first drying or first calcination of the mercury upon its own body is perfect, which should arrive in 256 or 260 days, about 9 months, you will pour the first imbibition in the weight I shall mark to you hereafter. Imbibitions. They are reckoned as 7 in number, and are contained within 10 parts of mercury or water against 1 of sulfur or earth, that is, 10 weights of spirit against 1 of body, which the philosophers have ordained to be put in. These 10 parts of air, or water, or mercury are not commanded all at once, in one time and altogether into the egg, but little by little, successively, in the imbibitions. Here is the stumbling stone of all students, who at first take some mineral which, after having grossly triturated by manual toil, they cause to pass through some 20 distillations of some spirit of dew, with this they believe, by such distillations, to open the body and impregnate that spirit with the sulfur, salt, and mercury of their mineral. They then put them together in a circulatory mattress until the earth has drunk the water and the spirit of dew, of which they put first 10 parts upon the body, and then cook it to unite them. In this procedure there are many faults against the established principles. Here the spirit of dew and the mineral are 2 extremes which can never be united by art, because they are separated by nature. First fault. Next, this mineral with all its sulfurs can never be exalted in purity, because the pure has not been separated from the impure. Second fault. The water cannot be drunk nor swallowed by the earth, because there can be no attraction of foreign and divergent things. Third fault. Art has not come to the assistance of nature to unite the pure with the pure, to separate it and help it to reject all impurity like a vomiting. Thus the elements cannot disengage themselves nor unite in a pure and exact simplicity. Fourth fault. Moreover, this mineral either is the true matter or it is not. If it is not, it is in vain that one works it. If it is still in vain that one works it, because nothing foreign must be added. Fifth fault. But I say more, all that I have just explained of this wretched and ridiculous method, even if it were done on the true matter, with its mercury, both exalted according to the rules, if one were to put 10 parts of the true mercury upon the true Ixer all at once, one would never succeed, because one would smother the Ixer, which the philosophers say must not be suffocated. This is what inspired me to explain the philosopher's meaning and to tell you that these 10 parts must be put at diverse times, and specifically in the number of the 7 imbibitions. How by this means the philosophers go out from unity and return to it. The philosophers take a matter which is one. They divide it, and thus go out from unity, counting 1, 2, 3, etc., and conduct their work up to 10. They bring it back to the unity whence they departed, that is, to the perfection found in the number 10, where one begins to count again by 1. Here is how they make their reckoning. They take equal parts of earth and spirit, or of body and spirit, namely 1½ part of the one and 1½ of the other, they count 3. Or otherwise, they count 1 part of body and 2 of spirit, supposing that 1 part has already been coagulated with the body or leafy earth, and that which is added in equal parts with this body and on its feet, they count 1 of this body and 2 of spirit, which make 3, and the 7 imbibitions poured upon each drying make 10 exactly. Behold a great sophism clarified, which poor apprentices cannot understand of themselves, and which no philosopher has wished to explain plainly. It must further be known that the imbibitions are ordinarily made with the milk of the Virgin, which is the air, because the oil is carefully reserved for the imbibitions or multiplications to the red. The just weights of the imbibitions. One may here recall the magnificent loves of King Solomon, who had 300 concubines on the one hand and 700 queens on the other, destined for his royal bed and the service of his loves and pleasures. They show us the number 10 in all those of 3 and 700, which bears much upon the loves of our young king, to whom we are about to present 940 nymphs, not counting those of whom he is already the spouse. This may be considered in the weight of the imbibitions, whether one counts them by drams or by grains. However they are counted, it must always be of the same thing. If, in the first proportion of our work, the earth weighs 480 grains, one must give as much virginal milk. The whole will make 960, and the parts will be equal. Nevertheless, one must count 3, 1 of body and spirit coagulated with it, which passes for 1 part, and 2 of spirit coagulated with the body, which count for 1 part and 2 of spirit in weight equal with the coagulated body. That being posited, the first imbibition will be 240 grains, the second 300, the third 375, the fourth 468, the fifth 585, the sixth 732, and finally the seventh 940 grains, which puts an end to the imbibitions. Here you must count 7. Join together 3 and 7 and you will have 10. And if you calculate the whole product of the imbibitions, which is 3,640 grains, you will find, with the 481st added to the earth and united, that you have 9 times more water than earth, which establishes the number 10 in the mercury alone. For if you add to the 9 parts of water the first equal and coagulated part which you put at the beginning, there will be 10 parts of water against 1 of earth, which verifies the saying of the philosophers, who always ordain 10 parts against 1 of earth. But this number of 10 parts of mercury is to be understood as counting what is put in the imbibitions, and not all at once. Because the philosophers did not explain this plainly, 1,000 men have rushed into error and have never been able to reach the goal, for they put all at once the 10 parts of water against 1 of earth, an irreparable fault, even upon the true matter, though otherwise well disposed. In putting here 10 parts at a single stroke, one breaks the weights of nature, and the child, who must be nourished according to his strength, would find himself at once stifled and suffocated, not being able in his weakness to digest such a quantity of nourishment, under the weight of which he would remain extinguished, since this tender child needs only so much milk, which is his moisture, as his dry and his natural heat can attract, digest, and convert into his substance. Thus it is easy to understand that the weights of art accommodate themselves to the weights of nature. The science which regulates is always infallible. Fourth part. End of Mercury's discourse. After this long discourse, in which Mercury had fully treated of the composition of the Zur and the Ixer, he said, "It remains for us to treat of the elixir, but before passing to this third part, you must drink a cup or two." At once he began to play the flageolet, and at the sound of this little instrument appeared the god Pan, with 4 satyrs dancing and leaping, and 10 nymphs, both dryads and hamadryads. they all came crowned with flowers. The 14 nymphs of Juno came next, and among them shone the fair Disopia. At last, all the sea nymphs, the Dorida and the Nereids, ran in with the sirens. In an instant, I saw a beautiful youth of every sex. The heroes and argonauts appeared, such as Hercules, Perseus, Thisbe, Castor and Pollux, Orpheus, Jason, the gods of the mountains, the gods of the woods and forests such as Fauns, Sylvans, Satyrs, Apollo and the 9 muses, those of the metamorphoses such as Hyacinth, Narcissus, Adonis. The rivers and neighboring fountains formed a numerous troop of the same divine populace, who exercised themselves before us in various games, while the nymphs danced to the sound of the instruments of Apollo, Orpheus, and the muses. Pan and the satyrs frolicked, the heroes looked on in silence, the lovers sighed and sang their loves. At this moment I heard the chime of the bells of our temple, which lasted a quarter of an hour, during which I saw a very long table prepared. Then the bells were set ringing in full peal, and I saw at once a long procession of men clothed in various colors, crowned with laurels, with a herald of arms at their head who cried, "Honor to the poets." And as they marched 2 by 2, they formed 2 ranks facing each other at the end of the table, leaving a large space in the middle for those who followed. At the head of the poets was Virgil, who was followed by another file of men clothed in white satin embroidered with gold flowers. At their head marched a herald crying aloud, "Honor, and 4 times honor, to the orators." These did as the first, each bowing in profound silence to Mercury. I admired the majesty and modesty that shone on their faces, particularly Cicero, Hippocrates, Demosthenes, etc. In the 3rd place followed another file, far more magnificent, of illustrious personages clothed in true purple, whose fine robes were laden with golden braids and fringed with gold at the hem. They wore 3 crowns, one upon another, in the manner of a golden tiara, adorned with diamond points and other precious stones with pearls. The orators had no crowns, but only velvet caps of red, set with pearls, diamonds, and other gems, for these last were preceded by a herald who cried aloud, "Honor, 100 times honor, to the true philosophers." On arriving, they seated themselves on both sides of the table, where Mercury held the high end. Hermes was at his right hand and Pythagoras at his left, Plato near Hermes, Aristotle near Pythagoras. After all the philosophers had seated themselves with the gravity of kings and the full splendor of high majesty, the orators sat according to their rank, and the poets last. Then many officers, all crowned with flowers, loaded the table with exquisite dishes in chased vessels of gold. Each dish was intermingled with greenery for salad in plates of agate. Mercury had reserved a place for me, and ordered Ganymede to dress me in a costume partaking a little of the poet, a little of the orator, a little of the philosopher. I was bathed, cleansed of human filth, clothed in ornaments all bright with gold and precious stones. My robe was of every color and long like that of the poets, descending to the heels. The second was of white satin with flowers, reaching to the legs, somewhat shorter than that of the orators. They put on me a third, of purple, coming only to the knees, much shorter than that of the philosophers. Then they placed on my head a crown of laurels, and a cap of the orators, and upon the cap a crown of the philosopher's tiara. Then they girded me with a belt of each color, green, white, and red. They put bracelets glittering with gems on me, and because I was priest of Diana, they placed upon my breast the Urim and the Thummim. 10 poets, 10 orators, and 2 philosophers were commanded to conduct me through the ceremonies and introduce me to Mercury's table, where he himself had marked the place I should occupy. The 3 heralds of the 3 estates came in order from their prince, and a satyr bore before us a standard, upon one side of which was represented a golden sun, and on the other a silver moon. The 3 heralds opened the procession, crying, "Honor to the disciple of Hermes! Honor to the favorite of Mercury and Pallas!" I was conducted in this ceremony to my marked place, above the last of the poets. I was entrusted to Hebe and Ganymede, who were there to pour the nectar. They placed near me a nymph crowned with flowers, who stood, holding in her hand a golden cup to pour for me the nectar she was ordered to present. Meanwhile I was much more occupied in examining the bearing of those personages, in whom I remarked so much wisdom and majesty, so much richness on their garments, so much delicacy and magnificence upon that divine table, that I was dazzled to the point of losing my senses by admiring, had I not been restrained by the presence of Mercury and of all those mighty men. I made a sign to the nymph to give me drink, which she did at once. As soon as I had drunk this divine juice, a sudden drowsiness made me think I should lose consciousness. I would have fallen asleep, had it not been for the respect I owed to the company. I inclined my hand gently to my head, to conceal my trouble from the eyes of the assembly. But the goddess Hebe, to whom I had been entrusted, had her eyes upon me, knowing what was to happen. She came immediately and touched my forehead with her beautiful hand. The radiance of her beauty awoke my heart and all its powers. She placed in my hand a stone named Christie's, to put in my mouth when such an accident occurred. This stone had the brightness and fire of all precious stones and of all colors. She whispered softly in my ear, "It is a congelation of my fountain which I have caused Father Hermes to preserve, to share with my friends. It dissolves in a glass of wine, or even of water from a fountain turned toward the rising sun. A single atom of this lapis will restore your strength and courage, and give you a new youth more flourishing than the first. This stone raises nature above ordinary powers, converting darkness into light, and the principles of death into principles of life, which you would easily do if you knew how to convert the aqueous and phlegmatic moisture into radical moisture. For if you had neither phlegm on the one side nor impure earth on the other, you would be like the gods. This stone which I give you does not take away the impure earth, but it converts the phlegm into radical moisture. It renders your spirit subtle, volatile, and luminous, purifies the blood, makes it fluid and of good color, opens obstructions, and drives away from the heart all impurity, darkness, and cold, forcing them to depart with the excrements it powerfully expels without pain. Take courage, and fear no more the force of this nectar." Saying this, she caused nectar to be poured for me, and put into it a piece of another stone than that which she had given me to keep for other occasions. I saw this piece dissolve in the nectar like sugar. I thanked her very humbly, and in a manner that was agreeable to her, with a gallant compliment on her beauty, her lovely voice, her gracious manners. At last, after many further marks of her kindness and my repeated thanks, she said, "I will that you eat and drink, to make you yet more divine." Saying this, she presented me a cup of nectar into which she had melted this lapis. "Drink," she said, "to my health," which I did. Then, commending me to a nymph, she departed. It was then time to partake of the meats, which I had not yet had leisure to consider. I saw that the entire majestic company of guests began to enjoy themselves, following Mercury's example, who encouraged them in this pleasant occupation. I cast my eyes upon our venerable Father Hermes, who, with a cheerful look, showed that the meats were good to the taste. Each at this banquet was served by a nymph, who poured him drink, and by a sylvan, who filled the golden cups with nectar. All the nymphs sparkled with jewels, and differed little from goddesses in the radiance of their beauty and the magnificence of their garments. The sylvans wore aprons of dark green damask trimmed with golden fringe, and they bore crowns of oak leaves. On this table I saw neither beef nor veal, nor sheep nor lamb, nor bread such as ours, nor game such as we eat. The dishes were filled with flowers distilled in alcohol, with essences variously prepared and of diverse colors. Some appeared in subtle powders, others in vegetables, or in jellies like red, green, or white ices, very pretty. There were many beautiful salads of a certain herb named lunar. I was told that all I saw was the essence of the purest things, separated from the impure earthly, and freed from their gross body. Indeed, I had never seen food so little material. I tasted them, and found them so delicate, so excellent, that I well perceived these were indeed the meats of the gods. No one spoke while eating. All listened to a poet who read aloud. The dishes had begun to empty when the reader said that in the year when 3 popes had been seen, 3 phoenixes had likewise been seen. At this all began to laugh, and Mercury himself smiled, saying that it was no marvel nor a rare event, for it had often happened, that from the ashes of the phoenix, as many as 3 might arise, if at that moment there was a conjunction of the Sun, Venus, and Mercury. He had scarcely finished when the attendants appeared with 3 phoenixes, on 3 golden platters, adorned at either end with the wings, the head and neck at one end, and the beautiful tail at the other, the whole with its feathers and colors. With the phoenixes were served 3 pelicans, 3 halcyons, 3 pheasants, and 3 peacocks, also with their extremities of plumage. The feet of these birds stood upright. These superb dishes were accompanied by exquisite ragouts. The sight of these divinely prepared meats sharpened the appetite. "Come, gentlemen," said Mercury, "let us begin with the phoenixes, whose taste is so charming. They are true food for philosophers, which do not burden the stomach. And when we shall have eaten them, if there were no more upon the earth, the bones of these, burned with cinnamon and other fragrant woods, and their ashes moistened with the simple tears of the dawn, would give rise to 3 more, one or several, according to the constellations." No one said a word, for it was a god who spoke. The good old Hermes shook his head a little, and everyone smiled, but the poets in particular laughed heartily, though without outburst. Mercury kept his seriousness, and looking at Aristotle, said, "Explain, I pray, to these gentlemen the poets, many of whom have not entered into our mysteries, that philosophers, more skillful than they and better physicists, often have 3 phoenixes when the conjunction is favorable. It will not be now, but when you have returned." Aristotle, who had risen to speak, sat down again. Mercury, turning to the reader, said, "Continue." The reader read these words, "System of Copernicus." Mercury said, "Pass that over." Then, looking at Copernicus, he said, "You dreamed well, my friend, when you put that foolish notion into your mind. You are nonetheless a learned man." Copernicus showed a smile with his teeth. The reader continued, "New philosophy of Monsieur Descartes." Mercury said, "Pass, there are more dreams. But he knows well the contrary now." And looking at Descartes, he said, "You conceived fine ideas which exercised you, and many others after you, but your novelty took no hold upon the wax nose of this old man," pointing to Aristotle, "who lets the Jesuits and the Sorbonne handle his nose as they please, but they have not been able to tear it off." Aristotle and Descartes smiled. "Talisman qualified by Digby," said the reader. "Pass, gentlemen, pass," said Mercury. "The divining rod." "The author has not done badly," said Mercury, laughing. "The little book is pretty, and reports some fair experiments." Then he said, "Seek the passage that treats of judicial astrology." The reader, having found it, read, "Judicial astrology condemned." "Stop upon this subject," said Mercury, "and read distinctly, that the company may hear the absurdities of those scrupulous ignorants who condemn what they do not understand. When we rise from table, we will discuss this question in our avenue, where benches are set. I will show you that they were wrong to condemn so beautiful a science, reasonable, admirable, and true, and that they failed to make the distinction I will then show you, by way of recreation. For now, it is time for us to enjoy ourselves. Come, drink. Read, reader." Meanwhile the symphony had withdrawn, so as not to interrupt the reading, and to give a dance to the kitchen nymphs and to the rustic and rural gods. By the care of Hebe and Ganymede, 50 casks of middle nectar had been sent there for all the troop, which was large enough, with provisions in proportion for that whole populace of little gods who danced and played at various games. The table of Mercury began to grow lively, and the strong nectar was at work, when Hebe came to me, while everyone thought only of their enjoyment. Her return was not noticed. I was delighted to see her. She said to me, "I left you longer than I wished. But I was here in intention, to serve you with all my power. I know you share the favor of a god powerful enough to make you happy, but the favor of a goddess, daughter of Jupiter, is not to be despised. I wish to teach you the way to my fountain, which renews youth. Here," she said, showing me a key made of a beautiful diamond, "here is a key to my fountain. I give it to you. Come there whenever you please. It is a place hidden from all mortals, who would dry it up if they knew it. I had conceived esteem for you even before seeing you, because I knew you had written a treatise on renovation, quite interesting, and that you had marked my fall, when a slipping step made me stumble in the sight of the gods, who laughed greatly. This memory brought forth a charming smile upon her rosy lips. After many marks of kindness on her part, and thanks on mine, she said, I still have things of a private nature to speak with you. But first, I would gladly drink. Drink also. I drink this cup for love of you, do the same for me. We both drank. After much conversation, I said to her, Madam, I swear that you are the only goddess in whom I place my happiness, my fortune, and my felicity. I swear it by your sacred fountain. Be it so, she said. I receive your oath of fidelity. Count on Hebe, daughter of Jupiter and wife of Hercules. Nothing shall fail you, and you shall enter into the cabinet of my secrets. The promises of goddesses are always accompanied by gifts. She drew from her pocket a gold watch, with a chain of the same. She opened the watch and showed me a certain figure. When you see the hand near this figure, Hebe warns you once for all that her arrival is near. When it touches the figure, you shall have her visit at once, always accompanied with some favors. Here is a snuff-box which I give you. It is full of tobacco unknown to you. It is precious, for this snuff-box, with what it contains, is worth more than all the treasures of kings. It was a beautiful emerald fashioned into a snuff-box. Through it I saw shining a red powder. The box was finely engraved. On one side was carved a fountain at the foot of high, steep rocks, bordered with green rushes, among which was hidden a little love, holding his bow bent, ready to shoot an arrow at those who should approach that clear fountain. On the other side one saw Venus seated on myrtles, close by the source. She held charms for those who might be struck by her son's arrows. In the distance from the fountain, one saw a troop of old men, who seemed very thirsty, but who dared not approach for fear of falling a second time under the cruel tyranny of love, whom they saw hidden in the green rushes. "Oh madam," I said to Hebe, "it is a great misfortune that your divine waters, in restoring youth, also restore new love, new fires, new pains, and new torments. Why have you not rather given them the virtue of extinguishing it? I fear for myself a tyranny so powerful. I would rather die than burn again with so foreign a flame. Love," she said to me, "is inseparable from youth. If old age is not exempt from this passion, how would you return to youth without returning to love? Learn that love is no evil in itself. It is only abuse, excess, and disorder that are to be feared. I abhor that abuse, and it is not love's cause. It is the effect of the bad conduct of lovers. I am far from being contrary to love. His mother and he are gods of universal power. To tell you the truth, my fountain is under their jurisdiction. They have over all waters a primitive power. The poets have sung enough that Venus is a goddess who draws her origin from the waters. Look to the other side, and you shall see the remedy." I saw another fountain, the same rushes, and love torn from the midst of the rushes by Pallas. He was thrown down, his arrows scattered out of his quiver along the rim of the fountain. He was signaling to Venus, who appeared half irritated, half desolate, to abandon that sacred place, as belonging not to wanton loves, but rather to a chaste love that inspires only an honest ardor for the sciences and for wisdom alone. Hebe figured in this dispute that had arisen between Venus and Pallas concerning the fountain. She laughed to see Pallas holding a handful of rods to whip Cupid, but Venus seemed intent on snatching the rods from Pallas's hand. "What you see on this snuff-box," she continued, "is the representation of what took place among us goddesses at my fountain, which Venus and her little enchanter wished to usurp. See that I did not defend myself, and that I left everything to Pallas, who is a masterful lady, and who did not bend, least of all before Venus and her son. You must not, then, so fear the love of a goddess like me, for it is not a burning or carnal love, but a kiss of the spirit, a pleasure of the spirit, a union of the spirit. This love plays out entirely in the spirit, the body has no part in it, otherwise it would no longer be a divine love nor a divine pleasure, it would be an animal coupling, unworthy of you and of me. You possess the heart of a goddess. I shall see you again tomorrow. Here, this is my portrait, keep it. I also give you this spyglass, by which you will see me wherever I shall be. In this glass I will speak to you by glances and by gestures. Receive also this heart, our two hearts are united in it by a miracle of our love. Touch this heart and feel whether it is not warm and palpitating. I will tell you another time how this is done. I leave you without leaving you, when I am in your heart as you are in mine. Follow me at once with your glass when I am gone, for if you do not see me in my new and first movement, the effect of the glass will fail, but if you do, you will see its effect every day of your life. At these words her inflamed eyes shed 2 tears, which I quickly gathered, and there were formed 2 pearls of great beauty. She said to me, keep them for love of me. Farewell until tomorrow. I saw her depart with regret, and while I looked after her my eyes shed tears, some of which fell upon my plate and others upon my glass, all congealed into pearls like those of Hebe, which I looked at and examined carefully. This glass was a very long, rather large golden tube, at both ends were crystal lenses so fine and beautiful that with this glass I could have seen a lark upon the brow of the moon and the stars. I saw well that I would make agreeable use of it thereafter, not being able to distract myself longer from the delightful company in which I found myself. While I fed my mind on the pleasant memory of Hebe, rather than tasting the dishes on the table, I saw that our wise orators and poets had become drunk with nectar, while I was drunk with love for a goddess. Dessert was served, composed of all kinds of preserves, whole oranges, candied pomegranates and lemons, all neatly arranged in pyramids. At that moment Iris, messenger of the gods and of Juno, appeared with all her attendants and set before Mercury 2 porcelain dishes. One contained an iced milk of admirable whiteness, which Iris had taken in passing through the sphere of the moon and which Diana sent to the company. The other was filled with a conserve of roses which Iris had taken in the heaven of the sun, and which Phoebus likewise sent, as a rarity, before the sages for their delectation. Similar dishes were brought to all the tables. Mercury wished that the fair nymph of Juno should honor the company with her radiance by taking a place at table. He had her conducted to an empty seat that was opposite me. I was struck by her brilliance, both of her person and of her garments. She, too, was surprised to see a young man among so many old men, and even more to see me clothed in their 3 garments. I said to her, Mademoiselle, are we going to see rain? Why, sir, she said. Because, I replied, the beautiful rainbow never shows its colors without giving rain. You are right, she said. It is true that I am its messenger, but it will be for another country, and not for this one, which today is honored by the gods and the sages. Then Mercury commanded the reader to close the book. He wished that everyone should rejoice. Fine, large strawberries were set upon the table. Mercury said, here is a fruit that I greatly esteem, because it has the form of a heart, and, looking at Ovid, he said, you, learned poet, who have so well written the Metamorphoses, do us the favor of reciting the history of this fruit. Ovid rose, and having saluted the company, recited these verses. Damon, scorning the love of the nymphs who made war upon him by order of Venus, angered at the contempt he showed those fair maidens, was besieged by a troop of loves armed with sharp arrows. One after another the loves shot at that insensible heart. Hard as it was, that heart was pierced by a shaft better loosed than the others, and the shepherd remained wounded with love for the nymph Iris, here present. The victorious loves returned with their master. On the way, weary from their shooting, they rested in the cool of a myrtle wood, and as each wished to attribute to himself the glory of the deed, their dispute grew heated and led them to bend their bows against one another, so that, piercing themselves, they died by their own shafts. Venus, being warned, came seeking them and was reduced to weeping when she saw them all stretched out lifeless. She took all their little hearts, embalmed them with much sugar, and put them in the earth. Spring gave them a second life without taking from them the shape of a heart. Mercury greatly praised Ovid, then turning to Virgil, said, Prince of poets, oblige us by saying on this subject whatever pleases you." Virgil rose, and after saluting Mercury and the whole assembly, he spoke thus in flowing verse. "Of all the nymphs, none has more wounded with love, nor caused more sighs, than the fair Iris. Even the sages, and all those crowned heads you see, have regarded her with as much love and admiration. The wishes of the whole assembly have drawn her down from heaven to honor us with her presence. This fair nymph, by the empire of her eyes and the brilliance of her radiant colors, has struck more deeply into the heart than into the eye of an infinite host of loves, whom she has subdued under her laws. Her lovers went to lament among the echoes of the woods and rocks, the languors and wounds without remedy caused by the sweet tyranny of the goddess. They expired before the eyes of Iris, who, to mark her compassion, covered her bow with many small clouds, which, as they slowly veiled the colors, put them into mourning. And the nymph, veiling her fires with a dark garment, has often shed tears which gently watered the fields and meadows. But Venus and Love, favorable to lovers, have willed, to soothe Iris's grief, that the tears of this beautiful nymph should bring back to life those tender lovers, whose love once more revealed itself to the eyes of the fair one, reborn in the form of hearts, always the seed of love, and the noblest interpreter of the power of that little tyrant. Thus, without contradicting Ovid, these fruits are not only the hearts of little loves, but also of an infinite number of lovers who immolated themselves before the eyes of the charming Iris." The whole assembly was delighted with the recital of these two great men, and Mercury, after giving Virgil great praise as the prince of poets, gave a silver crown to Ovid and another crown to Virgil. Then, turning to Iris, he said, "It is true, fair Iris, that your charms are so fatal to your lovers that you know not how to pity them until after death." At this point the last dish was brought in. They served 3 chameleons, 3 salamanders, and 3 echinias, or remeras, divinely prepared. In that moment, Iris asked for drink and would have only pure water. She told me that she drank only water. I replied that it was for this reason she poured forth only water. She told me that she had fire and water so equally balanced, as she appeared in her colors, that she was therefore the sign of peace and reconciliation, which Almighty God showed after the flood, restraining the fury of the elements under the power of her bow that bore the standard of diverse colors. Red marked fire, blue water, yellow air, and green the earth. I have fire enough to resist the water and drive it back within its limits. I have water enough to contain the fire within its bounds, and the air, which is my dwelling, is a middle that holds me between these two enemies. Seated upon my bow as upon a throne, I bind their fury, reconcile them, and send them back mild and submissive, each to its own domain. Such are my functions between heaven and earth, to maintain them in peace. Mademoiselle, I said to her, since you are plenipotentiary of peace among the elements, and steward of loves, since it is you who disarm thundering Jupiter, why do you not disarm love also, to pacify the souls alarmed by the furies of love? I thought that, as a reconciler, you might give peace to the heart. I see I was mistaken, since so many lovers have died of love for you, without your pitying them until after their death. They are well recompensed, you have changed their hearts into strawberries. I then addressed to her some gallant remarks, which led her to believe that all I had just said was mere gallantry on my part. In return, she gave me a mirror with 2 faces, set in gold and adorned on both sides with precious stones. On the side of the glass were 2 malleable crystals. In perspective one saw Argus, with his 100 eyes, slain by Mercury. On the other side, Juno was seated on a fine rainbow, fastening the eyes of Argus to the tail of the peacock. Iris said to me, "This mirror will show you new things every day according to your desire. By washing it with a drop of pure water, and wiping it with a piece of green taffeta, you will see in it whatever story you wish, by pronouncing these words, 'Shine, fair Iris.' You will see therein the heights and the depths of the universe, all natures, and how the world came forth from an immense cloud called chaos. Hidden within, all the most secret secrets and the sciences will appear unveiled to you, when you look into this glass." I thanked her as gallantly as I could, and at that moment, Hebe struck me on the shoulders and asked what we were saying. "We were saying," answered Iris, "that divinity is nothing but fire and love in the goddesses." "You should have added," said Hebe, "in the nymphs." After several little disputes of this kind, yielding the empire of hearts one to another, Iris kissed Hebe and said to me, "Monsieur, love this fair goddess, preserve her, for her merit is infinite. Give her your heart, but she will not refuse that I have my small share of it, as much as she pleases." Hebe looked at me and said, "And where do you stand?" I said to her, "Madam, I love Hebe as a goddess, Iris as a nymph. I believe it may be so, one cannot be loved without the other. You both reign over hearts. Iris herself drinks at the fountain of Hebe and mingles her waters therein. I am therefore no longer surprised that you are in love, for you reign over the waters like Venus, and I believe that in your absence one might easily caress Aurora, Flora, and Pomona, who resemble you enough and are nearly of the same temperament." "Very well," said Hebe. "Tomorrow I shall tell Ganymede to send you 2 or 3 muids of nectar, since it gives you so much wit. You know that a muid is the divine measure, and is worth 10 times yours." Iris said, "As for me, I have only strawberry water and colors to offer you. If you wish to accept some emeralds, I will gladly give them." Hebe replied, "I do not advise you to disdain the water that Iris offers you. It is good to mix with your nectar, which is a little strong for a human constitution. You cannot conceive the riches concealed in these luminous waters, which are as so many pearls, precious stones, and melted gems. They carry with them the soul and spirit of waters and of stars. They water the earth to cover it with verdure. We will give you knowledge of Aurora, Flora and Pomona, of spring, Galatea, and all the flowers, some of which are male, others nymphs. And I wish that this fair nymph who pours your drink shall henceforth serve you with her satyrs. For in the future, you shall be a little more than a man, if you make good use of heavenly favors." Having said this, Mercury struck the table with his hand to rise. Everyone poured themselves some nectar or drank in thanksgiving to Mercury, who said that it was necessary to go in procession to his temple, to render thanks to the great and only God. Hardly had he ceased speaking when all the bells of the temple were set in motion, and after each had taken a glass of the liqueur that Diana sent for Ratafia, and after taking a little powdered tobacco, they rose and walked straight to the temple, where thanksgiving was rendered to the great God and sung in music. After this, everyone went out freely. All 3 groups of the sages admired the temple. Virgil and Ovid promised to describe it. I went to salute them, as well as Cicero. These old friends congratulated me and overwhelmed me with courtesies. At that moment a great noise arose among the rustic gods and nymphs who were laughing, playing, and frolicking together. Mercury said, "Let us advance." The nymphs, who for sport brought Apollo to trial for having flayed alive Thyresias, rather Marsyas, in truth, note of Lat, whom he had made dance to the sound of his flute, were present. The god Mercury and the general council of satyrs condemned him to be cast into the bath after being stripped, and that for this purpose the bath should be prepared. Immediately the satyrs poured a muid of boiling water into a great marble basin full of cold water, and the basin becoming lukewarm, they seized Apollo, stripped him of his golden hair. Then was seen the god of light without any ray or splendor, like an eclipsed sun. He knew not whether to laugh or weep. Despite his resistance, they laid him quite naked on the edge of the basin and cast him in. He found the bath very good and sweet, he enjoyed it and fell asleep. At this moment loud cries arose, and their games turned to sadness, because it was thought Apollo was dead. Diana his sister, hearing this news, was afraid and ran in alarm to the bath. Seeing that he was only in a lethargic sleep, she reached him her hand. This god raised his, took her by the arm, embraced her, drew her into the bath, where she likewise fell asleep. The cries redoubled because the luminaries were eclipsed. It was judged that these gods were suffering, and that their sleep would be followed by death, which made all tremble. They cast their eyes upon Mercury to know what he thought. But he only laughed. Pan, the nymphs, and the satyrs, all stunned by this accident, fled as quickly as they could, for fear of the god's death. All that frolicsome populace of rustic gods vanished in an instant. Only Ganymede, Hebe, and Iris remained, who gave orders for the tables and service to be removed by the nymphs and sylvans, who had taken no part in what had happened, and therefore had neither the fear nor the grief of the others. Mercury rejoiced to find himself alone with the sages and the learned, who strolled in the avenue. Knowing well what would come of Apollo and Diana, they gave it little thought. Mercury gave orders that Iris should stretch her bow over their bath, and prayed Hebe to go and feel their pulse, and to make each of them drink a draught from the fountain, after which they were to be left at rest, for 7 hours later they would be reborn, more beautiful than before. Hebe and Iris immediately went to execute Mercury's orders and led me to see the mystery. I saw those two great luminaries as though extinguished, and their bodies reduced to a kind of black slime floating at the bottom, at the will of the waters. I departed to return toward Mercury. Hebe took me by the arm and said, "I will come to see you tomorrow. I am not at all vexed that you love Iris. We need her, provided that in loving her you always love me still. I teach you that you will never succeed in the ways of wisdom and in the acquisition of its greatest secrets if love, who governs nature and by whom she allows herself entirely to be led, in things above as in things below, is not your guide." Then she embraced me, kissed me, and pressed my hands. I went to Mercury. Everyone sat down when I arrived. I too sat, not far from Mercury, in order to hear better what was about to be said. Mercury said, "I have reserved the question of judicial astrology to be decided at this moment. I cannot understand that there are people so inconsistent as to condemn a science so true and so beautiful. I pray you, gentlemen, recall here your sublime intellects to decide with me against the ignorant. Will you tell me that a man, or any other creature, who has received at the time of his generation the triplicity of fire, and has been formed of those emanations, all of fire, and therefore endowed with a robust and martial temperament, will not have a greater natural advantage than he who has received the triplicity of water, which can form only a phlegmatic and ill-disposed temperament? If with this igneous triplicity either the Sun, or Venus, or Mars were in Leo, or Aries, or Sagittarius, will not that man who has this advantage be a hero? If Jupiter is in Leo or Aries or Sagittarius, can one not judge that this man will have fortune with kings or princes, and will be at least a general of armies? If Venus is found in one of the three, will not that man make fortune through the love of the greatest ladies? If Venus is particularly fortified in a planet that gives him wit, if my planet Mercury is found in Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, who will not judge that this man, provided he is not retrograde or afflicted by Saturn, will lodge wisdom, science, and eloquence in a robust and well-formed body? Shall we pretend that a man who has only two of these signs of fire will have the same advantages as one who has all three? That he who has only one will equal him who has two? It must be concluded that, the term of generation being 9 months, it may happen that the child is conceived, formed under these three signs, Leo, Aries, and Sagittarius, which form the fiery triplicity. In that case one may judge that the individual will incline to noble and heroic actions, if the course of the planets be found in favorable aspects, actions which may be forejudged as to their kind, but not as to the individual. This is the distinction under which this question must be understood. You may apply this principle to any other triplicity whose effects are known. Mercury then addressing Hermes, bade him decide the question. That wise philosopher rose and said, "The principle is so natural, so conformable to reason, that it must be consecrated in conformity with the opinion of the wise God who honors me with this commission, with the distinction he has added. It is not contrary to the dogma of the Catholic religion, since this view is in agreement with good sense and right reason." When Hermes had ceased to speak, Mercury dismissed the assembly, which applauded his conduct, and each went away according to his rank, as he had come, that is, with the gravity befitting the wise. Mercury and I remained alone in the avenue. Hebe and Iris were at the edge of the basin where Apollo and Diana were asleep. Mercury said to me, "Let us go to the fountain to see Apollo and Diana." When we arrived, we saw the luminous rainbow over the fountain, and Iris seated upon it in a garment of dew. Mercury said to me, Look attentively. If your sight is subtle enough, you will see the souls of the moon and the sun fly out from their bodies, reduced to putrefaction. See that black slime floating upon the waters like melted pitch, that is their bodies. As he said this, we saw emerge from that slime a white light and another, somewhat more red, which hovered above the waters. But Iris, who was seated in the bath, received them into her rainbow, which appeared more radiant and more purple. It is necessary, said Mercury, that these waters flutter a long time among these colors. Let us return into the avenue, so that I may explain to you all the mysteries you have seen. Curtain drawn by Mercury, or explanation of this entire fabulous account in relation to the science. If you have wit, said Mercury, you must have recognized, in what we have just seen and heard, the divine mysteries of our work. The company of philosophers, orators, and poets shows you that our science has always been the object of the greatest men's inquiries. The magnificence of that table signifies the rich impressions of their physical writings. The flowers, jellies, sugared ices of diverse colors show you not only that they treated this matter delicately in theory, but also in practice, where one must handle only flowers, jellies, ices, and spirits. That precious tableware signifies the learned books of the sages in which they have served their fare, and in another sense, it means the clean and proper vessels used in the practice. I deem it unnecessary to tell you what the 3 phoenixes serve mean. It is that our phoenix is reborn 3 times above its ashes. You will readily understand the illusion of the Alcyons and the pelicans, which restore life to their young by their own blood, as well as that of the pheasants and the peacock. You will also have understood that those pomegranates, oranges, and candied lemons signify the final days when the work reaches perfection, and that iced milk, served by Iris or the rainbow, and the conserve of dew signify the work in white and in red, which does not delay to calcine when the rainbow appears, or shortly after. As for the strawberries, though they can bear no true relation to the work, one allowed oneself to recount some metamorphoses to serve as ornament and to cheer the spirit. The chameleon marks the variety of colors of the work, the echinies or remora, fixation, and finally the salamander signifies our perfect work which no longer fears the fire, in which it remains constant, permanent, and fixed. By the nectar you drank so deeply in that banquet, understand the juice and the very sweet savor of the physical writings, or materially, the exuberated work, taken as medicine. By the nymphs and sylvans, understand the waters and the fire employed in this marvelous labor. That dance, those games, those diversions, those outbursts of Pan and of the satyrs and of the nymphs frolicking together mark the tasks and operations the artist must perform as though in play, mingling fire and waters most opportunely, according to the existence of nature. But these gallantries and conversations, so tender and amorous, conceal a mysterious sense which I shall explain. Since all your discourse had no other theme than love, the goddess and the nymph stirred you themselves and moved you to love, which you pretended to fear though it was to your taste and inclination. You must unfold this mystery, which is beautiful enough. You, who were bathed and washed after being stripped of your ordinary garments to be clothed in magnificent attire, represent the body of the matter, which is first stripped, then washed, and given a new and physical form in the first work. But in the second, when the elements are loosed and separated, the soul, parted from the body, rises to heaven, that is, to the top of the vessel, where the spirit accompanies it, and together they paint divers colors like the rainbow, adorning themselves with beauty and light. The soul is represented by Hebe, goddess of youth, and the spirit by Iris. Since the soul is more celestial than the spirit, it is well marked under the name of goddess, and since the spirit is more elemental than celestial, and of aerial nature, it is rightly compared to Iris, because she is the reconciler of soul and body, just as Iris is the sign of reconciliation. Now the body, soul, and spirit of the matter have a great desire to be reunited. This marvelous inclination to reunion is well expressed by all that was said and done of tenderness, of love, of passion between you, Hebe, and the nymph Iris. Now it is certain that the soul aspires to rejoin its body through the means of the spirit. So also, in the work, this soul, which is but a celestial vapor and the vehicle of tinctures and of astral fire, condenses in the form of brilliant tears rolling upon the body. The elemental spirit, inferior to the soul and of a lower region, does likewise, and by pressing the body upon its wings, they lift it into the air, mingle it with it, rarefy, subtilize, and dilate it into vapors, make it spiritual, and inspire it with life. This is well enough expressed by the tears of Hebe and Iris, by the kisses they gave you, even striving to snatch you up to heaven. That heroic Hercules, whom Hebe called monster slayer with disdain, showing she is weary of him, is the fire to which she is married since she issued from the body, but whose company she prefers less than the union with her body. For that fire will only carry her from heaven to earth and from earth to heaven until she is fixed in the heart of her dear lover, that is, in the body, which she never revisits without bringing each day new favors, just as Hebe promised you, never to come without fresh gifts from heaven. But why, I asked, is Hebe employed here rather than another goddess? It is, he said, with regard to renovation, which is one of the most admirable effects of our work. For that renovating virtue is not in the elements, dilated and rarefied into vapors, subtle as the heavens themselves. That virtue infused from heaven itself, and united with the soul, is our Hebe, and our very pure and subtle elements, which make their purity shine in the colors of the rainbow. This elemental purity is apt to receive and does receive that celestial and renovating virtue which is infused into it. For the elements, thus purified and shining, are represented by the nymph Iris, messenger of Juno, goddess of the air. Thus our fair Iris shines in the air of our vessel. This is the secret of that sort of amorous dialogue between you, Hebe, and Iris, explained clearly enough by this equivalence of the love of body, soul, and spirit, so that one may not believe that in the previous discourse there was any lascivious or impure intention. Finally, Apollo is cast into the bath. He draws in Diana. It is the sun and the moon dissolved to be employed in fermentation. The satyrs and the nymphs who strip them are the fires and the waters employed to take from them their form of gold and silver. The satyrs and nymphs flee, that is, the foreign waters are separated, and the fires of calcination are changed into those of digestion. The first gift that she gave you was a golden watch with a chain of the same material, in which you were to recognize the precise time of the visits of our goddess when the hand of the watch touched a certain point. This watch was nothing else but the philosophical vessel in which the egg, being a very clear crystal, shows all the movements or circulations of the soul, that is to say, of the volatile part, which reveals itself to the eye of the artist in the form of a splendor shining on the side of the vessel, like dew or a little cup of very brilliant waters, which little by little grow larger and show that it goes to visit its body as often as these drops trickle down upon it in a small stream to imprint upon it a new life and to fill it with the celestial favors which it has acquired in this new elevation. The golden chain signifies two things. It denotes the inclination of the soul to be reunited to its body, which is reciprocal between body and soul. Michael Meyer, in his emblems, depicts this love by a net which is tied at one end to the earth to a toad and at the other to a vulture flying in the air. The vulture represents the soul, the toad the body. It also represents the assiduity one must devote to the work, which must be contemplated without ceasing, and therein to adore the hand of God, which must be recognized. One must free oneself of all other business in order to give oneself wholly to so sweet a servitude which leads to so much happiness and honor, as the goddess Hebe said. The second gift is a snuff-box of a fine emerald, filled with a powdered tobacco that shines through it. She told you that this gift is worth more than all the treasures of kings. This signifies that the soul in its motions and circulations reveals a great brilliance of greenness, in which consists the force, virtue, and energy of vegetability. O blessed greenness, the philosophers cried. Hermes entitled the first of his writings on this science, the Emerald Table. It is in this sparkling green that lies the vigor of all nature. Virgil, describing the strength of Charon, who does not grow old in ferrying souls, said a fine word which well explains this constant youth of the immortals by these words, an ever-growing strength, a green youth, in allusion to spring which renews all things by its greenness. Green, therefore, in nature is a principle of vigor and vegetation. This color, in our work, encloses all the force and virtue of the elements, and represents the work of the earth which adorns itself with greenness and flowers in the season when it conceives fruits. Now this blessed greenness shows that our fruit is alive and promises us the precious red powdered tobacco, or the red stone. The fountain of youth engraved on one side among the reeds, in which love is hidden, laying snares for the old folk who have worked and who desire to come there to drink, signifies one of the properties of the stone which restores youth and therefore the sensibility of love. Another love and another Venus exercise here a new dominion, that is, a second folly which is reborn with youth, as though one could not be young without being mad. What fatality! That danger is what caused many sages to renounce the advantage of rejuvenation. Finally this new Venus and this second love guard their waters, near which they lie in ambush. Why, I interrupted, do you say their waters? It is, he said, because love and Venus draw their origin from water. Love is a moisture which constitutes youth, whereas old age is in the drying up of the humors. Why then is wisdom the prerogative of old age, while it would be so necessary at the beginning of life to guide us by its celestial torch, rather than to enlighten us only at the end, to show the death that approaches? Poor mortals, how pitiable we are! Young, we cannot be wise; old, we are so only because we can no longer be strong. From this we must conclude that if, in prolonging our life, we prolong our folly, it is wisdom to scorn the favors of Hebe and to withdraw step by step from the fountain where love lies in ambush with his dangerous mother. On the other side of the snuff-box was seen Pallas tearing love from among the reeds, and throwing him down upon the ground with his bow and arrows, chasing away both mother and son with blows of rods. This signifies the triumph of wisdom over love, but this triumph is reserved only for heroes such as Samson, David, and Solomon. What do I say? Has not love led even these heroes to triumph, and what must we not fear from that tyrant to whom we surrender so willingly? O weak humans, your frailty is well marked by those green reeds that yield to every wind. The portrait of Hebe signifies the soul, which, though separated from the body above which it flies toward heaven, always preserves the metallic form and the idea of its first nature, which it imprints anew by traits more brilliant than the first upon its glorified body when it comes to reunite with it. And the body on its side, which here is the patient, also preserves this impression, figured by the portrait of Hebe which she recommended you to keep with care. This may also be understood of matter and form, which are united by so close a bond that the body never loses the idea of its specific form, though separated from the soul, and is re-simplified and restored to its first general elements. What I can scarcely conceive is that mixts decomposed by the spagyric art and reduced into salt, sulfur, and mercury cannot, after this reduction, be re-simplified further. In these states we see that the principles preserve their character and their specific impression, as appears in the salt of mixts where one sees, with the aid of the microscope, the figures of the mixed from which it was extracted. Which shows that the knots made by the hand of God are eternal. The telescope given by Hebe, by which one sees her everywhere without losing sight of her, and by favor of which Hebe must speak by smiles, glances, gestures, and signs, signifies the glass vessel through which one sees the splendors of the moon, or of the soul which flits about and makes its motions to acquire perfection in passing through the 12 signs of the zodiac under the different planets. For soon it resembles Mercury, then Saturn, at another time it shines like Jupiter, afterwards white like the moon, then separated from the colors of Venus, then of Mars, and at last it shines with all the purple and brilliance of the sun. And while it shows its different faces, it passes under different signs for 9 months. For first it is conceived under Aquarius, which is a windy, airy, and mercurial sign. From this sign it enters Pisces, an aquatic sign, which converts it into water by dissolution. It exhales into Aries, where the gentle heat of that sign adorns it with the flowers of spring. From there it passes into Taurus, the domicile of Venus, where its amorous nature takes on fecundity. It passes thence into Gemini, a sign the most elevated in the sky, and very hot, which sublimates and exalts it and gives it celestial fires. From there it passes into Cancer, an aquatic sign where the sun takes a retrograde motion. Thus, in this sign, our soul, being unable to fly higher, takes this retrograde motion to return toward its body, by a rolling of waters that descend and rain upon this body in great drops, like Jupiter in a shower of gold, and this sign is also aquatic. After these abundant rains, it passes into Leo, all of fire. It then passes into Virgo, a cold, terrestrial, and constricting sign. Here it tends to freeze and to contract itself in its earthly body, so as to become but one single immortal and glorified body with it. From there it passes into Libra, where body and soul, perfectly pure, have become wholly celestial by resurrection, uniting in the point where the elements meet and consummating themselves in unity by their perfect equality. From Libra, a mercurial sign, it enters with its body into that vile sign of Scorpio, an aquatic sign, where it becomes a venomous taint and a true basilisk. In this fatal sign, it arms itself and takes up weapons against death, over which it gains victory and makes life triumph by its virtue. Finally, it passes and is accomplished in noble Sagittarius, domicile of Mars. There it takes its final fires in that fiery sign. And this luminous sign, by its fiery javelin, fixes it and gives it perfection. There it takes the soul of fire, more subtle than lightning, becomes itself an arrow of fire to which nothing can resist, and may rightly be called the force of all force. The artist, who is assiduous in observing what takes place in his vessel, will behold all the movements of Hebe, that is to say, the diverse motions and mutations of the metallic soul. The heart that Hebe presents to him, within which another heart is joined so that the two make but one single and same heart, is the splendor of body and soul united and glorified by the resurrection. This is a miracle of the love of Hebe, that is, of the soul for its body, to which its natural inclination draws it. This is what the philosophers call divine and adorable, saying that the hand of God triumphs in this part of the work. Truly, God does act here, for this resurrection is wrought by the love of nature, and God is found and works everywhere that love is, for God is the author of love. He is himself by essence all love, and love has taken its origin from the very heart of God. I esteem that the philosophers had reason to say, in this sense, that God himself labors in this part of the work, which is accomplished by the first laws, by the laws of nature, to which God is united by his concurrence, which gives it the precious mark of all conjugal alliances. Here, Hebe, that is, the soul, unites herself to her body, giving it this ring which signifies the double faculty she communicates to it, namely that of gold and of precious stones. As for the letters which are said to appear in the gem and to form a word between two commas, so that by this writing one may have the words and thoughts of Hebe, though this is but a playfulness of the author, one may say it should be understood of the assay of gold and jewels made by projection, in which the soul of the gold is recognized by the proofs. After such an assay, the letters taken, that is, the quality of the gold, one forms of these letters a word from comma to comma. This word is pronounced at each ingot or bar of gold that is made, this is good gold. These are the good tidings that one must learn from Hebe, that is to say, the soul of the gold must answer well to the trials. The tears of Hebe, which are formed into pearls, as also the diamond key which gives free entrance to the fountain, are the mercury of the sages, by means of which one may also make pearls, and which is the key of the fountain of youth possessed by the philosopher. Hebe moreover says, I will make myself seen and heard at the end of your telescope, as if she said, at the end of your work I will be made known as the true efficient cause of gold, without need of further assays. The mercury of the sages is well compared to diamonds, by reason of its brilliance and color, its purity, its transparency, and by the fires that shine in it, and finally by its price, the one being no less precious than the other. The mirror, set in a frame of gold studded with precious stones, given by the nymph Iris, represents on one side the shepherd Argus with his 100 eyes, slain by Mercury, and on the other side of the same glass, a rainbow with Juno seated upon it, attaching to the tail of her peacock the eyes of the shepherd. This represents the stage of the work in which the rainbow appears, together with the peacock's tail. At this state the work is a true mirror in which one beholds all the beauties of nature. The philosophers say more. They affirm that one may even contemplate therein the glory of the resurrection and of the future life. The certainty which they drew of these great mysteries, objects of our faith, in the glorification of the physical body inspired in them such a great contempt of death, that, far from fearing it, they rejoiced at its approach, which let them foresee the blessed end of their final perfection. This is a truth consigned in the most pious writings of the most celebrated among them. Some, not wishing to delay their felicity, refuse to prolong their lives by means of the stone. I have said that by often consulting this mirror, one will see every day new metamorphoses. One will even see therein the creation of the world, brought forth from the dark night, and all the most hidden secrets of universal science. In truth, when the work is pushed to this resplendent operation of the rainbow and the colors of the peacock's tail, one sees laid bare the true sense of the fables and metamorphoses invented to conceal it. One sees the truth of science, and of the philosophical writings. One recognizes therein that there is a truth in nature which belies the stupid denial of the ignorant. One sees in this secret work that nature imitates the Creator in his works, bringing forth from a black and dark cloud a living light separated from the darkness. Finally, this science once acquired gives the key to acquire all the others whatsoever they may be. This mirror was set in a frame of gold and precious stones because, during the time of the rainbow, the earth drinks its soul and its spirit which fall back upon it in drops of gold, and at that time the earth begins to dry and shows nothing but gold and gems. This is why the little peasant says that in this place all sorts of fruits come to grow and vegetate, such as citrons, quinces, oranges, delightful to see, springing from a soil all of hyacinths. And as proof that this author speaks of the time of the rainbow, a little before the passage just cited one reads these words, "The peaceful and gracious sign of the rainbow appeared, brilliant with all manner of rejoicing, and a token of a good end. And as the moon began to show herself a little, though not yet very bright, the sun began to shine more ardently, until the moon was full and shone clearly, as though all were pearls and polished diamonds." Judge then by the words of this author, whether when Iris appears in her shining adornment, this work is not a pleasant mirror of all that nature has received from the liberality of the sovereign Creator. Third part of this treatise on fermentation. Our winged virgin, otherwise our Mercury, weds two males without losing the flower of her virginity, namely, one spiritual and one corporeal. The first male is the body, to which Mercury is united at the time of birth. This male is nothing else than her own body, from which is drawn the very earth that serves as her vessel. The philosophers, such as Zachary, have called it ferment, because just as leaven converts the dough into its own nature and makes of it bread, so likewise this ferment or body, by its own nature, or rather by its fermentative virtue, converts Mercury into its corporeal force, by congealing and fixing it. They called it the first male, because at the moment of the child's birth this body rises and sublimates like a spirit, allowing itself to be borne away by its volatile part, after which it flies like a bird. This virgin, having married the husband who is her own brother, with whom she was created and formed, without being defiled by this first alliance, which is almost wholly spiritual, weds again in second nuptials, in order to have a corporeal offspring which the spiritual spouse cannot give her. She therefore takes a second corporeal spouse, who does not sully her virginity and who consents to share her union with the spiritual husband. The latter on his side rejoices, for the spiritual and the corporeal are of the same origin and sprung from the same blood. Without jealousy of one another, they have in common the same bride, who, by this double alliance, knows how to join fecundity to virginity. Now this second corporeal spouse is common gold and silver, added to her as corporeal ferments. Thus in this place the term ferment is to be understood of one of the perfect luminaries introduced into the work as a sort of leaven, which, receiving passively the spiritual and tinging virtue of the stone, converts it into its own corporeal form and matter of gold or of silver, in order to communicate it corporeally to the imperfect metals. For such bodies receive the spiritual and transmutative virtue only through the medium or corporeal vehicle which is found in vulgar gold and silver. That established, I say that vulgar gold and silver are the ferments, the one for white, the other for red. It is an axiom that every agent works according to the form with which it is clothed, and imprints its form and nature on the patient. If this axiom were false, the whole science of chemistry would be a mere chimera. Thus it is true, and not without astonishment, that it has been seen that even the perfect stone, when fermented with lead and projected, transmutes mercury only into Jupiter. Consequently, if you wish it to transmute into gold, ferment it with gold, into silver, ferment it with silver. For in this fermentation, gold has received as patient its virtue from the stone, it becomes agent, and a most powerful agent over all metallic mercuries, to which it communicates its corporeal form, which before was barren and sterile, and would remain such if it had not received from the stone the multiplicative virtue of its species. It is for this reason that one must marry a second time our virgin to a corporeal male of her own nature, namely, gold for the red, and silver for the white, in order to make her produce legitimate children, and not bastards, as she is forced to do when she is joined to imperfect metals by fermentation. Thus it happened in the time of Lully, who, seeing lead, tin, iron, and copper produced by projection, cried out, "Does nature walk backwards?" not understanding that the orific virtue of the stone, being wholly spiritual, was dominated and hindered by the impure form of the imperfect metal with which it was fermented, being able to act only according to the imperfect form to which it was joined. Whereas, on the contrary, it gives the form of gold when fermented with gold, for it can give only a perfect form when it is joined to a perfect form. For if the virtue of the stone were as well corporeal as it is spiritual, we should have no need to resort to corporeal gold to make of it a leaven. Though it appears under a corporeal form when it is perfected, it is gold as to its essence and nature. But it is spiritual gold, and the pure essence of gold cannot communicate the form of gold except spiritually and not corporeally. It perfects gold by giving it the tinging and multiplicative virtue of its species, which it did not have as corporeal gold. This foundation being laid, it is needful to know how gold and silver must be prepared for fermentation. To this end, one must summon the satyrs and nymphs, that is, the fires and the liquors, to strip Apollo and Diana, and cast them naked into the bath. It is no small labor, nor a light undertaking, to purge vulgar gold and silver for use in fermentation. For this, they must not be united to the stone in their gross corporeal state. They must be destroyed by a radical destruction, which is not easy, whence the philosophers have said that it is easier to make gold than to destroy it, because the philosophical mercury will not dissolve it unless it has received a preparation by which one tears away its great purple mantle. This is done by a perfect calcination in burning fire, as Philolethes says, by a burning Vulcan. One must not busy oneself to dissolve it, lest it fulminate. One must begin it with common mercury, with which it is amalgamated by trituration. Then it is passed through a cloth or chamois, and the mercury is withdrawn by distillation, until the calx of gold or of silver remains alone and clean at the bottom of the vessel. Afterwards, the calx must be ground on marble until it be an impalpable powder. In this state, it is calcined for 30 days in a glassmaker's furnace, given several washings, and finally given the fire of a reverberatory. This Herculean labor finished, it is presented to the philosophical mercury, which dissolves it by a putrefaction over much time, and reduces it into its first irreducible principles. Being dissolved, it must be coagulated into leafy earth, proceeding by the same period as for the formation of the philosophical child. This long labor must be begun as soon as the first is finished, and the preparations are placed in the egg. Process of fermentation. When the stone is completed and this imbibition dried, one takes of the stone, whether white or red, 3 parts, of the ferment 1 part, namely, of air if it be for the white, of natural fire if it be for the red, thus 4 parts in all, that is to say, equal parts to the whole. One amalgamates them, and places this mixture in a vessel of pure crystal, well sealed. This precious matter is cooked by the same fire and with the same method as the stone. In a short time one beholds the succession of the colors. This excellent work is called the elixir. It is within this fair work that one beholds the rare and wondrous marvels, the great miracle of nature, and the hand of God. Therein are seen rubies, diamonds, emeralds, steep mountains sometimes all of gold, of diamonds, of pearls and of emeralds. There are found the apples of paradise, quinces, citrons, oranges, pomegranates, peaches, and all manner of fruits springing forth from a soil of hyacinths, and trees of life planted in the midst of the earthly paradise for the healing of nations. When Mercury had finished these lessons, he showed me Apollo and Diana resurrected, and those two luminaries restored to heaven, fulfilling their ordinary functions. Hebe and Iris came to embrace me, and told me that for the love of me they had both shut themselves within a prison of crystal, where they guarded the divine source of the earthly paradise, cultivating that delightful place which they had placed in my power. In that little solar land where 1,000 rubies shone, I might converse with them. Then Mercury said to me, "Leave the mire and dregs of men, break with the world. Recall often to your mind the modesty of the sages with whom you have eaten divine meats and drunk the nectar in long draughts. Think on wisdom, who is your spouse, who must be your counsel, your torch, and your light. Do nothing base nor unworthy of a Christian philosopher. Nothing shall be wanting to you of what is required for the science. Render thanks to the great God, the Father of lights. Love with all your heart his only Son Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit who with him, as also the glorious Virgin Mary, whose most pure bosom received the divine word, who spake and all was made, who said, and all came forth from nothing. Love God, and all will prosper for you, and the love of God shall transform you into God, if you employ this great treasure in the love of God, sharing with the poor before all others." These were the last words of Mercury, after which the genii of the sages sang the Te Deum in music within the temple, where we all assisted in reverent silence. I found myself again in the place whence I had departed, and immediately set down this memoir, lest I should forget the learned instructions of Mercury. Praises be to God. Amen.